The guild worker finished the sign-up, handed him a copper ID tag, and wished him luck in his new super dangerous job. Meanwhile, Roran was just a bottom-tier copper-rank swordsman who was totally shocked that this moment was finally happening, since he never actually thought it would go down. He hated the idea and felt pretty bad, but since he was totally broke, he had no choice but to do it just to stay alive. He stood there staring at the Adventurer Guild, totally confused about how he even got to this city. To figure it out, he looked back a few days to remember exactly how this whole mess began. He stuck with his squad for years, grinding through missions and fighting beside his friends through every big win and crushing defeat. Roran's seen some crazy stuff after years of being a mercenary, but even the toughest crews eventually fall apart, and now his squad is officially history. They jumped into a fight that should have been an easy win, but things went sideways fast and they got totally crushed. He somehow cheated death in that massive fight, but now he's totally cut off from his old crew. After wandering solo, he finally hits the city and stops right in front of the Adventurers Guild, knowing these guys are basically just mercenaries with a different label. Joining the guild is as easy as paying a fee, and since they don't care about your past or your secrets, literally anyone can start fresh as a traveler. All he had left was the armor on his back, a massive two-handed sword, and a few silver coins, and he definitely wasn't about to just wander the streets with no plan. The guild was packed with all sorts of jobs like hunting monsters, gathering herbs, exploring new lands, cleaning and guarding people. And that's just the beginning. Adventurers are usually supposed to be total jacks of all trades, but since he's stuck at copper rank, he's barely got any jobs to choose from. He was totally on his own with zero backup, and even though he was still a beast in a fight, he knew that being solo made every little thing dangerous. So he was actually second-guessing a basic job like cleaning a ditch. Just then, a guy walks over and asks if he's looking for work, seeing that a pro swordsman like Roran is totally lost and can't pick a mission. He told him they had enough people but were totally short-staffed on the front lines, and Roran knew his old mercenary self would have turned that offer down immediately. He knew being a mercenary meant he was totally on his own, and without anyone to watch his back, he was basically a dead man walking. Most mercenaries are super picky about who they work for and always watch their backs. But all those rules go out the window when they're completely broke. The guy said the payout for a team was way bigger than going solo, so Roar asked what the mission actually was. He was stoked they were down to help and mentioned a new member just joined, so they're heading out as a squad of 5 to get the job done. He kicked off the introductions by announcing Rowan would be leading right by his side, and Rowan gave a quick, polite greeting to the group. First up is Nellen, his childhood friend and a copper-rank thief who's dreaming of becoming a legendary adventurer. Next up was Okusi, the copper-rank mage they've been teaming with since the very first day they joined the guild. They told her she could only use magic 3 times a day, making Lauren wonder if that was even a big deal, right before the guy asked the very last person to introduce herself. Her name is Lapis, a priestess for the god of knowledge who's still a total rookie, and while she's hyped for them to work together, Roran's down to team. Once they hit the city, they started using Lapis for her holy spells, but she claimed she could only cast twice a day, leaving Roran totally unimpressed and still full of doubt. The group's leader introduced himself as Sif, a copper-rank swordsman who's totally convinced he's going to be a legendary hero one day. Nellen starts hyping Sif up as the strongest guy on the planet, but Sif gets totally embarrassed and tells her to chill because he's all about that humble hero life. Then he welcomes the new recruit and offers to tell them all about his journey. He remembered finding hero records at 6 years old that changed his whole life. And while the team looked solid, Rorn realized that besides him and Sifa, it was actually just a group of girls. You hardly ever saw girls in this mercenary squad, but it wasn't because they were weak, so he didn't think it was a problem at all. Sif's story felt like it would never end, and after talking for ages, he finally finished by saying that was the moment he decided to become a hero. Rowan tries to get everyone focused on the mission, but Naylan cuts him off because the best part is coming, and they need to let Sif finish her story. Roran realized that having girls in the squad meant drama was coming, and now he wasn't just facing a deadly mission, but a total social mess too. Roran kept a totally serious face and reminded the crew they still hadn't talked about the mission, admitting he was broke after losing his job and just wanted to get to work. He's ready to check out any offers that come his way because he needs to get to work right now, and he's not wasting a single second on small talk when he can't afford to wait. Sif was pretty surprised, but admitted Roran was right. And just as they were about to start the mission, Nalon cut in and asked if they should even let Roran join the squad. She called him out for being an ex-mercenary, saying it's way too risky to travel with a guy who only cares about money and that he's just going to cause massive trouble for the rest of the group. Roran was used to people treating mercenaries like garbage, but Sif stayed calm and reminded Nullen that they needed a frontline fighter and Roran was the perfect fit. Nullen nervously agreed but suggested they keep looking, only for Okusi to jump in and remind her that no pro-adventurer would ever join a bunch of nobodies with zero reputation. Roran might not be a pro-adventurer yet, but the guy definitely knows how to fight, so Sif turns to Lapis to get her honest take on the new recruit. Lapis says she actually trusts Rowan and doesn't think he's a villain, but Nalon immediately roasts her, saying she's only this nice because her life in the church kept her clueless about how mercenaries really work. Lapis admitted she couldn't get any real info on the church mercenaries, so she just sized Lauren up based on his looks and how he acted. Roran kept it chill and reminded everyone that this is just a one-time gig, so they can totally handle a little bit of trouble for now. Seeing that the arguments had finally died down, the leader officially invited Roran to the squad and announced their next mission: wiping out a goblin pack in a forest 3 days to the east. Nalung says this village is called AIN and thinks they should ditch their current mission to find a job that actually pays way more. Okus says this might be a mission to explore those new ruins, but the guild usually only gives jobs like that to the high-level pros they really trust. Nellen was worried they'd be stuck doing cheap, boring chores forever, but Sif stayed hyped and promised that if they crushed these small jobs, the guild would finally start giving them the real deal. Roran heard that and immediately asked how many goblins were in the forest and how big their pack actually was. He admitted he doesn't have the exact numbers since the villagers ran for their lives the moment they saw the goblins, but he says it doesn't even matter how many there are because they're way too weak to be a real threat. Saif wrapped things up and said they're moving out tomorrow, and while Roran tried to double-check the plan, Saif had already gotten everything ready and told them to meet at the eastern gates at sunrise. Roran figured he needed 3 days of food and a spot to crash, but he was way too broke to afford any medicine. He beat everyone to the eastern gate the next morning, but his friends were still nowhere to be found. A guard spots him and acts like he knows him, asking if he's part of the local scene, but Roran just says he's waiting for his friends so they can head out at sunrise. The guard was totally drained from standing around since dawn, so he asked a sleepy-looking Roran if he'd gotten any rest, but Roran admitted he hadn't slept a wink either. The guard felt bad and warned him it was going to be a long day, so he tried to kill the boredom by asking if Roran was new in town and pointing out a local cafe. Roran couldn't believe that was the city's actual name, which totally weirded out the guard since who shows up to a place without knowing what it's called, but Roran just shrugged it off and said some crazy stuff went down that landed him there. The guard totally got it and said that even though Kofi isn't the capital, it's a super chill city with amazing food and friendly people. Then he mentioned it was his hometown and asked Roran where he crashed last night. He pointed to the house on the corner, and the guard grinned, saying the food there was legendary and they should grab a bite after work, which really got Roran thinking. He realized he never actually had a hometown since he spent his entire life bouncing from one war to the next, and honestly, he figured it was probably better that way. Sif heads to the gates and finds Roran already waiting, and when the guard asks if they're a team, Roran makes it clear they're only together for this one mission. The guard straight up said you can't expect much from a leader who only hangs out with girls, and while Rokran knew the guy was just being a jealous hater, he still agreed. Sifask asked how long he'd been waiting, and Roran told him that since the whole crew was finally there, they needed to head out for their 3-day trip to the village. Sif suggests grabbing a cart to speed things up, but Roran is low-key panicking because he only trained for walking, and since he's broke, he'll have to sprint behind it the whole time. He wondered exactly how fast he'd have to go to not get left in the dust. Lapis walked over and handed him 10 copper coins, telling him it was plenty to get to the village and back. She told him not to sweat it since it was just a debt, and maybe he'd help her out one day, calling the whole thing an investment in the future. Sif scored a carriage ride straight to Yane for 5 coins, and Lapis was hyped and ready to roll. He thanked Warren again, but then it hit him that he was suddenly in deep debt and knew this whole thing was going to end badly. He was seriously glad he found a ride, because walking that whole distance would have been a total nightmare. No one was super relieved they got a lift since walking would have been a total drag, and the driver just grinned, saying his wagon was empty anyway after selling all his grain. He got super hyped when he realized they were the ones sent to take out the goblins near his village, so he promised to lead them there right away since his home's safety was on the line. C thanked him for the help. Roran figured the pay was just a small bonus since the driver was going back empty anyway, and Nolan promised they'd crush the goblins so nobody. Warren tried to get the squad to plan their next move, but since nobody else thought they needed one, talking about it was a total waste of time. The driver told everyone they were crashing here for the night and would head out at dawn to reach the village by noon, so he wished them a good night and went straight to sleep. Sif told the crew they had to get some sleep before the trip, and since Nalen's back was killing her from that bumpy cart ride, they agreed to take turns keeping watch through the night. Roran was totally shocked that two people had to stay awake, but Sif explained they were swapping shifts because staying up until sunrise is way too hard to do alone. Roran had to explain one more time why only one person was on watch, even though it's way smarter to have a partner when you're stuck outside the safety of the walls. He was low-key fuming because real soldiers always stick together at night, and he knew they should be taking turns on guard duty instead of just sleeping out in the open like sitting ducks. Nolan snapped that the boss already made the call, so there was no point in talking, and Roran just agreed, saying if he and Sif were on watch, they had to figure out who. Sif was totally wiped out and needed to crash early, so Roran took the first watch and promised to wake him up in the middle of the night to swap. Late that night, Lauren was just chilling by the fire and staring into the dark when she suddenly heard some quiet, muffled voices coming from the tent. He realized this transformation was going to take way longer than he thought, especially since the others weren't waking up, and he was already running on zero sleep after losing his whole squad the night before. He used to crash right next to his squad to feel safe, but now he's all alone and stressed, just hoping his friends are still alive and praying that fate somehow brings them back together. Right then, Lapis pops up out of nowhere and totally scares him, but she immediately says sorry and explains she didn't mean to freak him out. She told him she couldn't catch any sleep in the tent, so she decided to just hang out by his side for a bit. While Roran joked that having insomnia right before a big, she asked to stay a bit longer, making Lauren wonder if this was a regular thing since he was so obsessed with everyone following the rules, even late at night. He says he totally gets the rush when you don't know if you'll see tomorrow, and Lapis just smiles, admitting she wishes this was rare when it's actually happening all day. This kind of drama was happening non-stop, and the people behind it didn't care at all, making her wish they'd stop doing whatever they wanted whenever and wherever they felt like. She claimed they were just following God's orders to go make babies, and Roran was totally shocked she was being so blunt about it since he thought priestesses were supposed to be way more uptight. He asked which god she follows since there are so many out there, and Lapis told him it's Kukula, the god of knowledge, but she warned him that gods are way too complex too. She told him to stop seeing them as people and treat them like symbols instead, admitting she's not even scared, but she warned him to watch out because most people would hate that way of thinking. Rowan thanked her for the heads up and admitted that since he's just a mercenary, he never really went to school or learned about religion, which made Lapis wonder why he even chose to be an adventurer in the first place. Roran just straight up told her his squad was gone without even blinking, and when Lapis felt awkward for bringing it up, he just shrugged it off like it happens all the time. He kept it real and said that every fighter wins and loses, but this time his squad just got unlucky and took a massive L. He admitted he could have easily joined a new team and he was totally lost in the city with nowhere to stay, so he joined the Adventurers Guild to make some cash, and Lapis got super hyped thinking he was secretly a total powerhouse. She was totally shocked to see his sword was as wide as her waist and admitted it was massive, but Roran just calmly told her it's a two-handed weapon that he sometimes has to use. He's been grinding to master the sword with both hands and even suggests they compare sizes, which Lapis is totally down for, but when he asks if she's sure, she just flirts. Rowan realized she was actually thinner than his massive sword, and when she pointed it out, he just calmly agreed while she awkwardly admitted it was pretty obvious. Rockran noticed the sun was already starting to rise, and Lapis realized they'd been talking so much that the whole night just flew by, so Rockran apologized for keeping her up until dawn. He joked that late nights are just part of the grind for a mercenary but probably a total snooze fest for a priestess, though Lapis actually had a blast talking to him, so Roran suggested they get moving and she was totally down. Sifoak Apand wakes up to see the sun is already out and wonders why he missed his guard shift. But Roran just tells him to relax since everything went totally fine. The driver shouted that everyone was finally awake, and as soon as they finished breakfast, they'd hit the road since the village was super close. Roran knew he'd need a new way to make money once this job was over. But just then, the driver shouted that they'd finally reached the village of Ian. Lapis noticed the village was totally surrounded by a thick forest, and Sif was sure that's exactly where the goblins were coming from to terrorize everyone. Roran wanted to grill the witnesses to save time, but Cephas was already pushing to charge straight into the forest. Roran stopped him right there, saying they had to follow the village's orders and talk to the chief first to get the full story before jumping into a fight. He always scoped out the enemies and their hideout to make a solid plan, since jumping into a job without even meeting the client felt totally reckless to him. Naylan was totally over his serious vibe and snapped that the mission was simple. Just kill the goblins and let the driver handle the introductions. She wondered why this easy job was taking so long, but Roran warned her that thinking it's simple is exactly how you underestimate the real grind. He remembered his old commander, a guy everyone hated, always said meeting the client was just part of the job, so the driver stepped in to stop a fight and promised to handle the village elder while the crew just focused on slaying those goblins. Sif took the lead and broke down the formation, putting himself at the front, Nalon in the middle to guard the mages Lapis and Akusi, and Roran at the very back to watch their six. He told everyone to finish the job, and as the villagers finally breathed a sigh of relief, he led the whole group straight into the forest. Nylon looks at Lauren and says they don't really need those uptight mercenaries, but Okusi gets annoyed and reminds them that someone has to take the hits, while Lapis sweetly adds that she'll heal anyone who gets injured. Lun made it super clear that magic is off limits unless Sif actually gets hurt. Rowan realized they'd charged into the woods with zero intel on the goblins, so now they were just going to wander around aimlessly and burn through all their energy. While trekking through the woods, Nellen spotted some raspberry bushes and got super hyped, so Sif suggested they grab a bunch since it had been forever since they had fresh fruit. Okus spots some donkey grass growing nearby, and he knows it's actually a super useful material for magic. Lapis told everyone to stay focused on hunting the goblins, but Roran realized that since everyone was so distracted, the monsters would probably find them first if they didn't get moving. Lapis teased Roran about how he'd already given up. He stayed totally calm and asked if she was still hanging in there. Lapis admitted she was feeling pretty weirded out. She told him it was super awkward when he acted too casual, so Roland tried calling her Mrs. Lapis instead. She tells him Lapis is totally okay and asks why he's acting so awkward. So Roran admits he's never actually used her name before and says she should just call him Roran too. Lapis stuck with calling him Mr. Rowan, but she quickly blurted out that she wasn't trying to make things awkward between them. Rowan told her to just call him whatever was easiest, and Lapis gave a small smile, saying she'd stick to what she was used to. Right then, Roran realized something was totally off. No one suddenly stopped dead because she heard a noise in the woods, and Roran's gut told him someone was definitely creeping up on them. Siaf warned Naylan that monsters could be lurking nearby, and Nalan agreed, saying she wasn't sure what was coming, but the sound was way too steady to be an accident. Everything went south in a heartbeat. Those painful bites were just the start of a brutal ambush. Goblins jumped them out of nowhere, and Roran was totally fuming when he saw his team. Lapis tried to throw up a shield to protect the squad, but we shut that down immediately because it definitely wasn't the right move. He scanned the area and spotted exactly where that arrow flew from, but the spot was a total nightmare for a close-range fight. He was totally kicking himself for not having a sword, so he chucked a dagger instead, but it barely even left a scratch. He realized right away that the hit didn't go deep enough. Sif was fuming that the goblins were trying to bail, so he ordered his team to hunt them down and follow them straight back to their secret hideout. Roar realized once again that nobody cared what he thought, but he still tried to warn them that chasing after the enemy like idiots was a total waste of time and way too risky. Sifi says they're here to wipe out the goblins, and since they finally have a lead, they have to finish the job or the whole mission was a total waste. Naylan backed him up and called Roran out for being too scared, reminding him that the leader's word is law, even though Roran knew that wiping out the goblin nest wasn't even part of the mission. As the main group pushes forward, Roran and Lapis hang back, and even though Sif went ahead with Okusi, Lapis feels way safer sticking with Roran since mages and priests always need a bodyguard in a fight. He asked if she was really sure about this, and she didn't hesitate for a second before saying she was ready. Roran spotted a trail of goblin blood on the ground, making it super easy to hunt them down. Roran walked up to Lapis to see what she thought of the squad's skills, especially how Sifu stacked up as a swordsman. He warned that these goblins are weak alone but multiply like crazy and get dangerous in groups, so if you can't take them out fast, you better have a solid plan. He saw the group was a total mess and moving way too slow, so he knew they'd only win if their swordsman was a beast, and he really wanted to see if Sif actually had the skills to pull it off. Lapis figures that since Roran was a mercenary, he must know the legendary demon swordsman, and Roran confirms that he's definitely heard of him. He remembered that facing this swordsman meant you were basically dead, but if he was on your side, you couldn't lose, so nobody was crazy enough to pick a fight with him. He asked Lapis if she seriously thought Sif could ever compare to a legend like that. Lapis laughed and said even 10 million Sif wouldn't be enough to stop the demonic swordsman, but Roran snapped back that he was sounding totally insane. Lapis gave a little smirk because he was in the exact same spot, and after hearing her, he just sighed and admitted he was being a total idiot since he was broke and would end up in debt no matter what. Lapis gave a sarcastic, "I feel for you," and Roran was totally thrown off because she phrased her sympathy like a question. Right then, Sif finds a cave that looks like the goblin base, and since a trail of blood leads straight inside, even Nalan agrees they're in the right place. Roran stared at the narrow cave and hesitated, realizing his massive sword would be totally useless in such a tight spot. Nellen snapped that if he was so scared he could just leave, but he wasn't getting any of the prize money, while Saif tried to chill him out by saying goblins are basically total weaklings. He tossed Roran a weapon he'd scavenged earlier, and Roran grabbed it, figuring it was way better than going in empty-handed. Sif told Okusi to light up the path with magic while Nalan scanned for traps, and once they saw it was safe, they headed right into the cave. Okusi quickly chanted a spell, making a bright light that cut right through the pitch-black darkness ahead. Ra was totally shocked that they were burning through precious magic just for light, thinking a regular old lantern would work way better, and it seriously made him wonder what was even inside their bags. Nellen finished checking and found 0 traps, but Sif figured there were kidnapped people inside, so they had to hurry up and save them. Rohan thought Tiff was being way too cocky since they could easily get jumped or walk right into a hidden trap. He felt totally safe and told everyone to keep moving, thinking they got lucky since the goblins ran off so fast they didn't even leave a guard at the door. Okus says goblins are totally brainless, so if they get hurt, they're way too stupid to even think about setting up a defense. Roran was stressing that they were rushing in way too fast, so Lapis walked up and asked him to just say what was on his mind. He calls it a total trap because the entrance is wide open, and when Lapis asks if goblins are really that smart, Roran says even monkeys use lookouts, so there's no way these things are dumber than apes. Lapis wondered if monkeys were actually smarter than goblins, since they live in groups and use tools just like humans do. Roran realized she was actually super into these ideas, which made sense since she's a priestess for the god of knowledge. Lapis saw he was totally spacing out and asked if he was okay, but right then, Sif spotted a bright light coming from a room up ahead. Roran realized that if they could see the light, the enemy could see them too, so Nalan warned it might be a goblin trap, and Okusi added that archers would make. Roran shook his head because walking straight into a trap was a bad idea, and even though it was brave, it honestly felt like a total suicide mission. Akuse only gets 3 spells a day and already burned 1 on an attack, but she still cast a shield to stay safe, and Sif thanked her because he totally counts on her magic. Lapis turned to Lauren, asking if that would really be enough, but Lauren just gave a super vague answer, so Lapis asked what he would do if he were in that same spot. Lauren didn't even hesitate, saying he'd just block the cave with branches and grass and light it all on fire, since trapping them in the smoke and heat is the easiest way to shut down an ambush. Lapis said they needed oil, and Roaring knew that without it or flint, starting a fire with raw wood was basically impossible, so they were ready to just give up and head back. He let out a heavy sigh because being too broke to even buy basic gear is the worst, and Lapis just gave him a quick nod to show she totally got it. Sif announces he's heading inside with Roran, who stays chill but points out he's got 0 protective magic, so Okusi tells him to just use his massive sword as a shield. Roran realized the cave was way too tight to even pull out his sword, and trying to use that massive blade as a shield would just slow him down. Sif apologized because he couldn't cast another shield spell on top of the first one, but Roran just stayed chill and realized he'd have to survive this mess all by himself. Sif screamed for everyone to move out, and Roran was sure every bad guy in the place heard them coming. He told Riley the plan was basically to announce he was coming, and man, magic is a total cheat code since it lets arrows just bounce right off his body. Sif was totally hyped and started yelling that they'd take out everyone, but he tripped and face-planted right in the middle of his speech. Naylin bolts over to help him, and while Lapis tries to jump in too, Roran holds her back as Naylin keeps screaming for Sif to get back on his feet. Lapis spotted a weird dip in the ground that was definitely a trap, and a nervous Roran warned everyone to stay sharp because someone smart was hiding in this cave setting up ambushes. The safe's eyes were literally glowing as it clutched a beat-up old book, geeking out about how the hero inside was a total legend and that it was finally standing in front of a real-life idol worth looking up to. He dreamed of traveling the world and doing epic stuff just like his idol, so he swore that one day he'd become a legendary hero. But honestly, there was nothing romantic about this mess. Nalant was screaming his head off in total pain and rage. A pack of goblins just came out of nowhere and totally jumped him. Sif was totally frozen in shock, his mind spinning because this wasn't supposed to happen. They were just weak goblins, not some crazy demon army, and he couldn't believe things had actually gotten this serious. Roran took a good look and spotted one goblin that was way bigger and scarier than the rest, so he figured this guy had to be their leader or some kind of evolved boss. Lapis explains that some goblins are born special, starting out totally normal but evolving into absolute monsters as they level up and get stronger. She says this goblin is carrying a staff and wearing weird clothes, which means it's actually a goblin mage, a super dangerous high-level monster that can use deadly magic to take anyone out. Rohan knew fighting this guy without a plan was a total death wish, but he couldn't just back off now that Sif and the rest of the squad were already in the middle of the fight. Roran whipped around as he felt someone behind him, only to see more enemies closing in and realizing he was totally trapped with nowhere to run. The bite throws out a sand spell that forces its enemies into a deep sleep. Suddenly, the goblin wizard let his magic rip and a massive flash blinded everyone. Roran watched Lapis drop to her knees to figure out the magic, but she looked totally drained, so he rushed over and asked if she could even move, only to realize her power was... Okusi freaks out because her sleep spell totally failed, and while she's begging the enemies to stay back, Sif charges in to protect his friends and tells those goblins to keep their hands off the girls. His guard totally crumbled and he got slashed right in the middle of the fight. He couldn't stop thinking that this just wasn't possible because he was supposed to be the hero. The bite sank in. She screamed for someone to save her, but it was already game over. Roran realized it was game over since their escape was blocked, so he went up to Lapis and asked if she was too wiped out to even move. Suddenly, a scary thought hit him. The enemy was closing in from both sides, and they were about to be totally trapped. Lapis gave him a cold look and told him to ditch her since she was just a burden, but Roran couldn't believe how calm she sounded while basically giving up on herself. Lapis warned him that the enemies would kill any guy on sight but might spare the girls for a bit, so she insisted he leave her behind and run. Lauren told her to shut up and warned her that she'd bite her tongue if she kept talking like that. He remembered her saying she belonged right by his side and even lending him some cash, totally betting on him to have her back one day. He whispered for her to hang on because things were about to get wild, and since he was done waiting, he grabbed Lapis and charged ahead while arrows flew right at their backs. He knew there was no turning back, so the only way out was to push forward. Mana Chao Kamaha Chao, 1 marrow half. He spotted a tiny opening right behind the goblin mage that they could use to escape. The goblin wizard wasn't about to just sit there, so he started blasting fireballs at the runner, and Roran knew right then he was totally out of time. He lunged forward and sliced the goblin's head clean off, taking out the main threat in an instant. Rory was lucky to get away, but the danger was still real, and since they didn't know when the enemies would find them, they had to run for their lives right now. Every step he took made the exit look even further away, and he started getting really nervous as they pushed deeper into those creepy, dangerous caves. He was desperately hoping for a way out, but as he stared into the total darkness, he realized those old debts were costing him way more than he ever expected. Lapis was totally exhausted, but she noticed Roran was moving through the pitch black like it was nothing, and he suddenly snapped at her to shut up because she was ruining his focus. Lapis snaps that she's sick of being dragged around like a piece of luggage, but Lauren just stays cool and reminds her that he's the one doing all the heavy lifting, so she better shut up if she wants to stay alive. Lapis agreed to stay out of it, but she whispered that she deserves some respect, saying she doesn't need to be treated like a princess. She just doesn't want to be seen as dead weight. Roran hoisted her onto his back, and as she thanked him for the save, he realized she was finally sounding like her normal self again. Lapis finally asked the one question that was eating her alive. Why did he save her but leave everyone else behind? Roran didn't even hesitate, coolly telling her it was just his call because she was lucky and he owed her one. He told her to just pick any reason since they all worked, but Lapis wasn't buying it and thought he was just being nice, until Roran pointed out that a truly kind person wouldn't have ditched everyone else. Lapis stood her ground, insisting he totally saved her life, so Roran just shrugged it off and let her believe whatever she wanted. He switched the topic back to the weirdest parts of the fight, wondering why her voice changed and why she suddenly just froze up. Lapis realized the secret was out, so she decided to spill everything and started by asking him if he even knew what demons were. Rockran said he already knew they existed and explained that the world is full of more than just humans, like beast folk and demons. People are usually super careful around demons because these demons only talk to people when they want something, and since they're total loners who think way differently than us, even the toughest mercenaries knew it was better to just stay away. The church treats them like total monsters for not following their god, and you can spot a demon instantly by their glowing purple eyes, but everyone is mostly terrified of the legendary demon lord, even though he isn't actually trying to take over the world. Lapis casually drops the bombshell that she's actually a demon, but Lauren isn't buying it since she looks like a normal priestess and doesn't even have purple eyes. Lapis explained that she doesn't believe in some big supreme god like humans do, because demons actually worship the god of knowledge who's all about discovering new things, making magic and learning the only things they truly find sacred. She says she can use both holy spells and regular magic, which is crazy because other gods are usually stuck with just one. Roran finally figured out the secret behind her crazy powers. It totally explained that weird light magic he saw earlier. It turns out she's actually a mage and a priestess at the Kyo. Lapis said maybe someone could pull it off, but she seriously doubted anyone was on her level since her demon powers are way beyond any human. Ruin realized that if you could actually mix magic and holy spells, everyone would be rushing to become a priest for this god. He asked why a demon like her would even be an adventurer since they usually hide in the mountains. But Lapis told him that's a total lie because demons are actually everywhere. They just stay low-key and hide their crazy power to blend in. Nobody even notices them. So Roran asks if they're holding back their power on purpose, and Lapis admits that's why she's in this state since her body isn't exactly normal. Lauren realized she could move her hand again, and Lapis explained that her limbs and eyes were actually fragile magic tools powered by mana, so every single movement drained a ton of energy. She reminded him that he saw it with his own eyes. Okusi couldn't use any magic, and it was all because of that goblin mage's spell. There's no way a basic goblin could pull off magic that crazy. So Roaring holds up a pendant and says, "This is the magic tool the monster was using." Lapis took one look at the pendant and realized it was definitely the same device. She had no clue how a goblin even scored a treasure like that. Luckily, she could tell they wouldn't. It's going to take a bit for her to move her body again, but she can still look around, and Roran finally gets why she wanted that gadget trashed, though he's hanging on to it for now since it's totally powered down. He asked why she was suddenly talking so weird, but Lapis explained it wasn't some local accent. That's just how she actually speaks. She was totally out of magic and couldn't even move. But the second things got dangerous. Her brain snapped into combat mode, making her talk and act like a completely different person whenever she's in a fight. Rockran said he totally got it, but he couldn't help pointing out that things were getting way too weird whenever she was around. Lapis brought up the fight again, admitting that telling him to leave was the smart move, but she thanked him for ignoring her and carrying her anyway. She said that even though demons get a bad rap, they never forget when someone does something nice for them. Goran just nodded and told her she could pay him back later, but right now they had to find a way out of these creepy caves because he still had a really bad feeling about this place. Lapis agreed they were way past where the goblins first jumped them, but the tunnel just kept going, and she realized this wasn't a normal cave. This place was something totally different. Roran agreed, but he realized that after passing so many goblin rooms, they might actually be stuck in a never-ending loop of these same hallways forever. He was praying they'd find a way home, but these halls were way too straight and perfect to be natural, making it obvious that someone had built them on purpose. Rockran wants to turn back, but Lapis reminds him they'd have to survive that death trap room all over again, making Rockran wish there was just an exit on. Lapis tells him he'd be super lucky to find an exit, but Rohan says he doesn't bet on luck, and Lapis admits she probably won't be much help to. She explained that when she left the Demon Lands, her parents gave her these fake limbs and eyes so she could look normal, become an adventurer, and finally join a squad. Lauren says she's actually got way worse luck than him, and Lapis agrees, pointing out that she's only lucky because everyone around her is too clueless to see who she really is. Lauren told her to stop if it was getting too hard, but she wouldn't quit, explaining that her parents hid her real hands, legs, and eyes somewhere in the human world, and she couldn't. Roran tells her he's not trying to win a contest for who has the saddest life, while Lapis explains that if she finds her missing body parts, she can just snap them back on to be whole again, so Roran tells her to head back home and get the real story from her parents. Lapis points out a dead end, but Roran says real dead ends are totally dark, making Lapis hope it's the exit while worrying more goblins are waiting to jump them. Roran told her the coast was clear of goblins and to dim the light. Then he asked if she could stand up while Lapis apologized for being such a drag. Roran said it was fine for now, but warned her he'd have to drop her if things got too dangerous, and Lapis agreed because she knew she'd just stop him from even pulling out his sword. Rockran was really hoping to avoid a fight, and just as he hit a dead end, he spotted a faint glow peeking through a crack in the wall. Lapis thought about crawling in, but she quickly realized her hands and feet were useless, and honestly, she was way too scared to go in there alone. Roar was worried she'd get stuck in that tight gap, so he suggested smashing the wall to make it wider even though it'd be super loud, and he told Lapis. Roan was racing against the clock, wondering if he'd finish before his enemies caught up. But after checking out the wall, he realized he could take it and quickly smashed a hole big enough to... Lapis gave him props for finishing even if it took forever. But Roran was just happy they weren't caught. So he told her he'd climb up first to pull her up. Lapis says they're in this together, so it's all good. And even though Rockran is totally wiped out, he finds his second wind and keeps pushing forward. He asked her what she saw because he really needed to hear her take on things. Lapis stared at the walls in awe, realizing they were built from a crazy mana mixture, while Roran pointed to a weird glow to explain how it all worked. Lapis explains this is a super rare material from an ancient civilization, and even though nobody knows how to make it anymore, it can actually suck mana right out of the air and turn it into light. Roran froze the second he heard about the ancient civilization, his mind racing to make sense of it all. Lapis explained that way back in the day, there was a kingdom that was... Back then, humans lived side by side with half-breeds, beast men, and even demons, and old ruins prove that basically every powerful leader in that world was a straight-up magician. Their cities literally floated high up in the sky. But after the whole country vanished one day, the survivors scattered everywhere to build brand new nations. Roran realized these ancient ruins were basically a massive payday, and Lap warned him that if they didn't move fast, some big-shot guild or random treasure hunters would definitely swoop in and steal everything. Roran looked totally crushed and said things were looking pretty bad. Lapis scanned the room and suggested they scrape some of that glowing stuff off the wall. Even though the light was super dim, it was... Rora spotted some shards on the floor and pointed them out, and Lapis was totally hyped, saying one of the pieces looked absolutely incredible. We remembered right then that if these really were ancient ruins, things were definitely about to get ugly. Lapis asked why he thought that, calling the place a total mess, while Roran just wanted to know if she could finally stand up. Lapis said she still couldn't do it, explaining that even though these places are super dangerous like he warned, there are actually totally safe spots with zero traps or threats. Roran said the craziest ruin he ever saw was actually a super high-end bathroom that had a perfect sewage system, smelled totally fresh, and didn't have a single trap or security spell in sight. Lapis smirked, saying it was super weird that such a wide-open spot had zero protection, and Rorn totally agreed that nobody had even bothered. Lapis then guessed that maybe these ruins just weren't dangerous at all, and that the real scary places were actually pretty rare around here. Rorn and Lapis both wondered what these ruins were, so Rorn told her to stay on high alert and watch her back just in case. Lapis promised to keep her eyes peeled for magic traps, but only if Rorn handled the fighting. Rorn just laughed and pointed at his sword, saying that's exactly what it's for. If things get ugly, they can just bail through the goblin cave hole, but he's not even sweating those guys and just wants to sneak back to the surface without a fight. Lapis had a bad feeling things wouldn't go this smooth, and Rorn agreed, saying he didn't believe in God or their rituals as he suddenly gripped his sword to listen. She hits him up to ask what happened, but Rorn listens in and warns her that someone is closing in. Lapis sized up her power, knew her magic could handle the invaders, and told them to give her the signal when it was time to strike. Voices whispered from the side about a sketchy guy carrying a girl, wondering how they even reached these ruins, or if the whole thing was just a crazy illusion. Someone else shut that down, saying they're definitely real since they're giving off heat, so he thinks this is basically the worst place to be hanging out. 4 people suddenly blocked Rorn and Lapis's path, and Rorn instantly spotted the silver tokens on their chests. These guys were legit silver rank adventurers. The first guy just smirked and said that escaping the goblins only to get lost in these ruins was basically the worst luck ever. The second guy chimed in, saying their whole squad was wiped out and since they were the only ones left, they must be super lucky. Suddenly, Nim grabbed the guy by the ear, making him scream and beg her to stop before it ripped off, but she just told him that if he didn't start listening, he wouldn't even need ears anymore. Deep in the dusty ruins, 4 silver rank pros stepped out to meet Rorn and Lapis. There was the hot-headed fighter Chuck, the sassy duo Nim and Archer, a quiet leader named Ritz, and an old-school mage named Colts wearing some clean but vintage gear. Colts caught Rohan staring at Nim and asked with a smirk if he'd never seen an elf before, making Rohan totally blush and apologize for being so rude. Colts joked that everyone was staring because she's a total beauty, but Nim wasn't having it and threatened that he'd lose his eyes if he didn't shut up. Colts gave a little smile and admitted that even though he's old, he's not ready to go blind. But Nim just coldly replied that one eye would be plenty for her this time, while Ritz finally got fed up with their bickering and told them to chill out because they're both a huge headache. He cut straight to the chase, saying they totally got what Rorn and Lapis were going through and would usually help them out, but they were stuck on a mission right now. Nim then mentioned Rowan remembered the job Milan ditched for a bigger payday, realizing they'd somehow ended up right at these sketchy, newly discovered ruins. Chuck knew these ruins were a total death trap, but the loot was way too good to pass up. So his crew tried to snag the quest first, only to realize they were in a massive race against other adventurers. The Colts explained they're in a secret battle with their rivals to see who can help the guild more for a massive reward, so they can't afford to lose a single second. Rorn promised he wouldn't mess with their work and just wanted to find the exit, but Ritz had to admit that they were actually lost too. Rorn admitted the plan was a total bust, but Ritz jumped in to say they stayed calm and recorded the whole route anyway. He started laughing to himself, looking totally convinced that they had already failed. He went back to check on Lapis, who noticed everyone was totally staring at her, and Ritz joked that for someone too scared to move, her glare sure felt heavy while he carried her. Rorn cut straight to it and asked why they were lost. Ritz sighed and admitted it was all Chuck's fault for missing a trap, and then the whole squad fell right into a pit. They were lucky there weren't any crazy spikes or poison traps at the bottom, but it was still a huge drop. And since the whole squad fell together, there was nobody left up top to pull them back. Ritz is totally fuming and swears he'll never forgive Chuck for landing on him, but Chuck just brushes it off like it's no big deal, while Nim watches the drama and tells Chuck he better make a final wish before she makes him pay. Chuck flashed a grin and said he was in. Then Ritz got back to the point, admitting that no matter how hard they tried, they were still totally trapped, and Lauren just nodded because Ritz said they were pretty banged up after the fall, but they used potions to heal, and now he's got a question for them. Lapis looked at the chaos and realized she had one last healing spell that was way stronger than any potion, so she just needed to wait for the cooldown while the rest of the party acted cheap and relied. Rorn realized right away that they could just ditch him and take the Lapis for themselves. Lapis points out that Roran is ready to scrap while she's stuck and can't even budge, meaning someone has to lug her around and ruin their fighting power, and if they just... Ritz overheard everything and asked if they really thought his crew would do something like that. But when Roran and Lapis both said they definitely looked guilty, Ritz had to admit they totally looked like a bunch of thieves. Nim made it crystal clear that if anyone even thinks about ditching the husband to just take the girl, she'll personally end them. Ritz keeps it simple. Lapis heals them if things get dangerous, and in return, Ritz joins the squad until they escape the ruins, which Lapis is totally down for. Ritz thanked him and made their team-up official, and even though Roran was still a bit nervous, he agreed it was time to keep searching for a way out. Roran just wanted everyone to make it to the surface safely, but deep down, he knew a happy ending wasn't happening. Lapis asked Roran about that nasty shoulder burn from their last fight, but he told her it doesn't even hurt anymore thanks to a special healing potion and some bandages. Lapis wasn't totally convinced and told him to speak up the second he felt worse, since she was saving one of her last 2 spells just to heal him. Ropreen realized Lapis was just playing it safe and totally lied to everyone about only having 1 spell left. He was totally shocked that Lapis lied after their promise, but he knew they had to stick with this silver-ranked squad until they finally made it out alive. Chuck thought these ruins were super sketchy because ancient spots like this are usually just crawling with golems and zombies. He thought it was super sketchy that no enemies showed up in the ruins, but Rory just said it makes their job way easier. Chuck thinks if anyone else shows up, it won't be for a while since they've only run into goblins, but Lapis guesses the monsters crawled through other cracks just like the one they used to get in. Chuck explains that the ruins were totally sealed until some hired wizards finally cracked the seal a few days ago. And since the lock was so crazy strong, they expected a massive boss inside, but all they found were some measly goblin tracks. Colt figured the guards either died of old age or got taken out by goblins since it's been so long. But it's super sketchy because they should have found some bones, yet there was nothing there but monsters. Colts pointed out that if ghosts lived here, the place would look totally different, reminding everyone that every ruin is unique and they should wonder what it was actually for, while Roran secretly thought the whole layout was just way too confusing. Chuck said they should put their plans on hold and just worry about getting out alive, right as Ritz spotted a bunch of goblins waiting for them up ahead. Roran tells Lapis to head down, but Nim's totally confident she can handle things and warns him to watch his back while Roran gives her a quick, "Got it." Ritz saw there were only 7 goblins, so they totally had them outnumbered, and Colt said he'd back them up with magic if things got messy. Nim said they didn't need help, and the squad totally crushed every last goblin on their own. Once the dust settled, Chuck let out a massive sigh of relief while Roran was totally blown away by how skilled his new teammates actually were. Ritz acted totally chill and said being silver rank wasn't even a big deal, making Roran feel like a total jerk for being rude again as he realized these guys were way out. Ritz reminds Ruin they're here to hunt monsters, saying even if they can't wreck the whole nest, they still get paid for every goblin ear they bring back, making Ruin ask if he's actually for real. Ritz agreed the years were useless for their squad and handed them to Roran, which totally shocked Nim since Ritz is usually a huge cheapskate, while Chuck joked that Roran could finally flex on every other adventurer in town. Nim joked that the sky would literally fall if Ritz actually published something, making Ritz snap at them to shut up because he was just worried about the rookies. Lapis suggested they grab the goblin ears for later, and Roran agreed even though his bag was already soaked in blood and smelled totally gross, while Chuck pointed out that the goblins just wouldn't stop coming. Ritz hands Rohan a few more ears, but Rohan tells him he's all set and realizes that everyone else is totally ignoring the weird smell. Lapis snapped that she didn't care, but the smell was so gross she couldn't even breathe through her nose, and Lauren told her she didn't need to state the obvious. Nim stops dead in her tracks and says the air smells weird, because the goblin stench is gone and all she can smell now is blood. Chuck told them that gross smell wasn't even coming from here. It was actually on the other side of the ruins, so they needed to keep moving. Lapis figured you couldn't tell human blood from goblin blood since they both smell like rust. But Ritz realized Nima's senses were on a whole different level. Chuck teased her for being super prickly, so Nim smacked him. Ritz told them to quit the drama, and Chuck just said he was trying to get everyone to chill out since things were so tense. Ritz told them to stay on guard and asked if Lapis could keep moving, but she apologized and said she needed a bit more time. Ritz says that even though they're tight, she's got to head back to the temple right away. Roran just tells her it's her call and he's staying. He looked down and saw his leather armor was totally soaked in blood. Ritz saw the massive puddles of blood and realized they were still bright red, so there was no way they were old. The cult says their rivals headed straight for these ruins and might still be lurking around, including some guy decked out in leather armor. Nim was super annoyed, snapping that Ritz and Chuck were being way too reckless and calling Colts a total idiot, but Colts just yelled back that he's not stupid. Nim told Rowan she wanted his take, and he was totally shocked she didn't ask the rest of the squad. She explained that the others could figure it out, but she specifically wanted to know what he thought about the person behind that armor. Looking at all that blood, Rohan figured the person was definitely dead, or maybe even torn to shreds right on the spot. Nim says the armor belongs to their rival thief Vora, but Lapis reminds her they've only run into goblins in these ruins, including that female one, so Nim asks her what she makes of it all. Lapis thinks the whole thing is super sketchy because normal goblins don't just take out armored warriors, and Nim totally agrees that there's something way more dangerous than just goblins lurking in these ruins. Lapis pointed out that they'd only run into goblins in these ruins, and she warned the group that these monsters don't usually kill women because they have much darker plans for them if they get caught. She realized that if a girl wearing that armor still got taken out, then there was definitely something seriously wrong with these goblins. She explained that if the girl was still alive, the goblins would have their fun before dragging her straight back to their nest. Rorit realized that goblins weren't the only things lurking in these ruins, and right then, Nim walked over to ask if he still remembered where their entrance hole was. Roran points out the path is a straight shot and way easier to follow, so Nim agrees but warns Ritsu that the whole area feels super sketchy and they need to get back to the surface to regroup. Ritz paused for a second and admitted the ruins felt sketchy, but he wasn't about to turn back just because of one bloody piece of armor. He knew they needed a way better excuse to bail than just one gadget. So Chuck suggested hunting down the enemy's tokens to justify heading back. Ritz was totally down for the plan and told everyone to stay on high alert since there's no turning back now. And even though they knew this mission would be a nightmare, finding those tokens Chuck mentioned could finally give them a new way out. Nem was totally down with the plan, so Ritz told everyone to keep pushing forward and stay on high alert. Lapis walked up to Lauren and called out his name. Lauren asked her if she was finally feeling okay. She told him she was doing way better and thanked him for the help. Then Ritz chim. Lapis said she felt awesome and loved the piggyback ride so much she wanted to stay there forever, but she knew she couldn't keep being a total burden to Roran. Ritz asked if they were a thing. Roran shut it down instantly, but Lapis just smirked and said they were working on it. Chuck cheered and told Roran he did a great job winning over a total beauty, but Nim smacked him and told him to go get his own attention instead. Chuck joked that Nim would probably take him out way before any monster even got a chance. Ritz heads back to Roaring and asks him to join the fight, ordering him to guard the rear with a young girl while Lapis promises they're a solid team, even though this is going to be a massive test for Roaring. She pointed out that copper ranks like them shouldn't even be exploring ancient ruins, but Roran told her she needed to get real about the situation they were actually in. Lapis admitted she was totally terrified, so Roran decided things had gone way too far and told her she had to get out of there. He noticed nobody else was even paying attention to her, so he told her he got why she was hyped, but she really needed to chill out. Lapis agreed and jumped to the next question, asking what their big goal was now. Nim told them they had to explore the ruins and find out what happened to their rivals, and both jobs were top priority. Lapis was totally down and said they should head back to the hole they fell through, but Ritz stopped her and asked why they even needed to go back there. Lapis figured the pit was just a trap for outsiders, and since it wasn't deadly, she guessed the whole floor was designed to do the exact same thing. She thinks these monsters were left here as security, and even if the tech is wild, the rule has always been the same everywhere. If you break in, you're gonna have to fight. She told them to save the heavy talk for later since nothing at this level is actually a big deal. She thought exploring was a total waste if the ruins were the real goal, and Ritz couldn't understand why they were heading back to that same pit. Lapis thinks there's a secret maintenance tunnel where everyone can meet up and find a way out, and Nim's totally down since they've got zero other options. Chuck didn't see anything weird, but he figured if the trap wasn't actually deadly, the exit was probably just hidden so well that he missed it. Ritz just smirked and reminded them it was Chuck, So Chuck sighed, gave up the fight, and agreed to head back and check out the spot where they fell. Colts checked his hand-drawn map and pointed out exactly which way they needed to go. Once they reached the spot, Roran saw the ceiling was super high and figured the pit just closed like a lid, since the room looked totally normal and he didn't see any way to go up. Chuck confirms their suspicions and flexes that as a silver rank thief, if something is hidden, he's definitely going to find it. Right then, the passage just swung wide open. Moran was totally shocked and asked Lapis what he'd actually done. She said the control panel was buried in the manuals, making it super hard to spot. Chuck snapped at him because the older guys totally missed the detail, but Colts just called Chuck an idiot and said the thief should have seen the trap coming. Rockran straight up admitted that he doesn't really get all those tiny details. Nim whispers that there are stairs right in front of them, and Ritz agrees, telling the whole group they should head up. Nim headed back to the group and told them he was ready to go, while Chuck checked out the ladder and decided it was safe to climb. He volunteered to go first, figuring that even if a monster was waiting at the top, he'd still be able to hang on and keep from falling. Nim was ready to go all out like this was their final stand, pushing Chuck to fight, but he hesitated and told her she was totally confused about what was really going on. Roran watched them talk and realized they were just wasting their time since nothing they did was actually going to work. Lapis thought about everything and realized that even if those guys somehow made a comeback, they'd probably never run into each other again, which was honestly just a lucky break. Chuck gave the all-clear saying the coast was totally empty, then dared everyone to head up one by one to see who actually had the guts to follow him. Lapis thought they should hang back for a bit, but Roran wasn't feeling it and warned her that it was way too soon to start celebrating. He warned them that after the ascension, they'll probably be sent back to the exact spot where Ritz and his crew fell, so they already know the secret way out. Lapis admitted she totally didn't see this coming and felt super bummed, especially since she had a rare chance to check out those mysterious ruins if she could just climb all the way up. Lapis figured there was nothing left on this floor, and while Roran was dying to get out of these creepy ruins, he knew he had to stay and finish the job. Roar blurted out that they needed to do something, but Lapis admitted that without divine spells, they were pretty much out of options. Ritz admits the climb is a total pain. Lapis warns that using magic would look way too suspicious, and Roran tells them to brainstorm some other useful skills instead. Lapis promised to map out the area once she figured out where they were, and he was totally blown away by how she pulled it off. Lapis excitedly explained that every guild hall in the world looks pretty much the same, and while builders might change a few tiny details, the main design never changes. She explained that ancient ruins follow the same logic since old civilizations always built things for a reason, which made Roran wonder if there were any weird exceptions to the rule. Lapis admitted that even this system has its glitches, and some ruins are way weirder than the normal ones you're used to seeing. Ritz was right in the middle of talking when Chuck suddenly showed up to report that everything was falling apart fast. He screamed that the goblins were attacking and told everyone they had to jump right now. Rowan tried to wrap his head around what was going on, and he looked seriously worried. Nim was totally losing it, staring at the same ruins and wondering how a massive army of goblins could have stayed hidden right in front of them this whole time. Ritz admitted he was totally lost because the goblins just spawned out of nowhere, and Chuck was shaking with fear, yelling that he didn't want to die at the hands of those monsters. Nim took charge and told him to shut up and run, because escaping was literally their only option left. Roran was totally panicking because they were in huge trouble again, and he knew one wrong turn would get them lost and let that massive goblin horde catch right up to them. Everything was crashing down, and he thought it was a total rip-off, especially since Colt was stuck and Lapis was completely out of juice. Nim frantically called out for Colts and Lapis to make sure they were okay, but Chuck warned them that if they stopped for even a second, they were dead meat. Rory saw his squad was totally wiped out and worried Lapis hadn't refilled their mana enough to keep them running for long. He rushed over, scooped up Colts and Lapis, and bolted away without losing any speed. Chuck asks how he's doing, and Ron says he's used to it since mercenaries always carry their wounded friends, but he admits he's barely slept in days. He realized right then that this was going to be way harder than he thought. Colts could barely even talk, but he apologized to Roran and swore he'd pay him back, while a gasping Lapis said sorry for causing so much trouble again. Roran told them to stop wasting their energy running and find a way out fast, because if he runs out of gas, They're all getting caught. Lapis walks up to Colt and suggests they just blow everything up with a massive fireball. Colts took one look at the massive crowd and warned them that the spell would be totally useless against this many enemies, so they shouldn't even try it. Lapis suggests building a stone wall to stop the enemies, and while Colts isn't sure he can block the whole path, he agrees to try even though he knows it won't. Lapis suggests dropping a firestorm, but Colts warns he only has 2 shots left and it won't be enough, so Lapis agrees while still hyping him up as a total. Colts noticed Ms. Lapis knew her way around magic, but Roran suddenly shut everyone up, secretly hoping they'd find a way to dodge the massive threat heading their way. Roran looked over at the others, desperately hoping someone already had a plan to get them out of this mess. Lapis straight up told them they're way too weak and don't have the gear to take on that many goblins, so fighting is totally hopeless. Chuck's totally freaking out because they're all about to be lunch. Lapis is terrified she and Lady Nim will be kept for breeding, and Colts drops the bomb that a girl from another group was already killed and eaten. Ritz snapped at everyone to keep their cool and act right, while Nim whispered that she was fading fast and couldn't hold on much longer. Chuck offered to carry her himself, desperate to buy them enough time to actually get rescued. Nim thanked him and said she'd totally count on him if things got worse, but Chuck just looked at her and told her that everything was already a complete disaster. Warren's brain is racing to find an exit, and he realizes their only hope is heading back to the stairs where they started, especially since everyone is totally gassed and about to lose their minds. He knew running away blindly was a death sentence, and even though he wasn't totally sure his plan would work, doing nothing was way worse. Roran straight up admitted he wasn't sure where to go, but he had some ideas and reminded everyone about the path they just ran. Ritz tried to retrace his steps but realized he was totally lost, so he hoped Chuck remembered the way or they'd never find that hatch the goblins came from. Chuck realized there was no turning back, and they'd have to find a different way through the tunnels, so he asked Ron what his big plan was once they actually arrived. Roar was super confident that since a huge mob of goblins just rushed down, the top floor had to be almost empty. He figured they were stuck after jumping down since they'd need a ladder to get back up, meaning the enemies couldn't just swarm him all at once. Chuck realized these goblins weren't dumb enough to just sit there, and he knew if they got trapped in a tight spot, it was game over. Roran asks the stallions if they can use their magic to buy them some more time. The Colts locked in and decided to roast the front line with a massive firestorm before trapping them behind a huge stone wall, with their guy promising he was totally ready to handle it. Ritz thinks there's no way they can stop a crowd that big, but Roran is super confident, saying that as long as the wall holds, they can climb over, and he even promises to be their human shield if they run out of time since the whole plan was his idea anyway. Ritz was totally shocked and shut him down, thinking there was no way Rowan could take on those massive monsters by himself. Rowan yells that the firestorm in the wall is basically a shield to keep the enemies back, so everyone needs to get moving right now before things get totally out of hand. Ritz was down for it and told Chuck to lead the squad to the hole, so Chuck nodded and pointed the way they needed to go. Ritz told Colts to get his magic ready, and Colts shouted back that he was already set to go. Ritz breaks down the plan. Chuck charges in first, the support team follows right behind, and Ritz stays back to protect everyone since he's the leader. Roran heard that and played it cool, saying he appreciated the shout-out, but he's the only one who can actually get this job done. Ritz shut him down, arguing that Lauren's heavy gear would get him gutted by goblins before he even finished climbing, while Ritz could easily leap up if someone just gave him a hand from above. Roran reminded him that even though he's a rookie adventurer, he's an experienced mercenary who's sick of being babysat, so he told the guy to finally start counting on him. Chuck gave the heads up that nobody else had fallen into the pit. Ritz saw his chance and yelled for everyone to get moving before the goblins caught them. Then he ordered Colts to start blasting them with magic. The Colts started their chant, whipping up a massive firestorm and slamming a giant stone wall right out of the ground. Ritz barked out the order that we need to get on our feet right now. Roar realized this is exactly how a silver rank mage gets it done, fast, strong, and hitting every single mark. Ritz watched the whole thing go down and got super annoyed because those goblins were acting totally out of line. Rowan noticed that even though the magic was quick, the fire was so intense it stayed warm, and he'd never seen goblins hunt this aggressively since they're usually pretty brainless. Ritz knew they were totally out of time, so he screamed at Roran to stop complaining and get moving right now. Just then the goblins smashed their way right through the stone wall. "Roarin', stay low and get in there to help us hold them back." Ritz looked up and screamed at Colts to hurry, but Colts stayed locked in and yelled back that he was giving it everything he had. Roran finally realized there was no way he was getting out of this fight. Chuck scanned the area and realized there wasn't a single enemy in sight. Chuck reached out and pulled Nim to her feet, feeling super relieved it actually worked, while she gave him a shaky smile and thanked him for the save. Chuck tried to cheer her up, telling her not to stress because they were moving out of there super soon. Ropin looked up and demanded to know why the others weren't moving yet since they were out of time, but Ritz stayed cool and told him they were basically there already. Nim spotted Chuck and shouted his name, pointing right at him. The truck totally panicked at her words and warned everyone the goblins were coming back. Then it begged Lapis for Ritz's help and asked Colts if the magic was finally ready. Colts is totally winded and says he's only got one shot of magic left, so Chuck offers to stay back and fight the goblins while Ritz and Roran rush to the next floor. Roran keeps taking down goblins, but the crowd never seems to get smaller as he struggles to keep his footing among the puddles of blood and piles of bodies. But then he noticed something totally off. There were way fewer bodies on the ground than there should have been. He saw the goblins falling and smashing into each other, so a ton of them definitely. He gets to the scene and notices almost all the bodies are gone, making him wonder if the goblins are dragging away their fallen crew for some mysterious reason. Lapis yells to grab Mr. Rowan's attention, and when he asks if everyone made it up safely, she tells him they're all there, but she warns him that a few really weird-looking goblins are hanging around too. She warns that they're barely holding on and will be pinned from both sides soon, which makes Lauren snap because it feels like someone is purposely luring all these goblins straight to them. He knew he had to get to the top right now or it would be game over. As soon as he reached them, he instantly smashed the very thing they had climbed up on, leaving Roran totally confused and asking what was even going on. Lapis tells them Chuck is hurt and Ritz is still busy fighting, but she suddenly stops when she sees Nima and gets really worried. Roran tried to figure out who that black goblin was, but Nim noticed the enemy wasn't scared at all, and that was a huge red flag. Lauren smashes the goblin and saves Nim right before he gets hit. He thought he'd have finished off a basic goblin by now, but this one was on a whole different level. His skin was so insanely tough that it didn't even seem possible. Nim didn't waste a second and went straight for the goblin's eyes, since Roran knew that even if their skin is tough, the eyes are a total weak spot. He said if the first hit doesn't finish him off, he's just going to keep swinging until the guy finally drops. Lapis shouts that another goblin is popping up from the side, and Ritz screams in pain as the monster grabs him and starts crushing his bones. Ron asks Colts how his magic is holding up, but Colts admits he's totally tapped out and won't be able to cast even the simplest spells for a while. Roran lunged at the second goblin to save Ritz's life. Teaming up, they absolutely crushed their enemies. Still gasping for air, Colts told them the black goblins popped out of nowhere. Their arrows did 0 damage, and Chuck got hurt saving Nima while Ritz finally made it upstairs. Nim felt totally guilty and tried to apologize, but Chuck cut her off, telling her that being modest isn't her style, and she needs to focus on her health and her uterus instead. Roran asks Lapis if she found anything big, and she says she's got a hunch that makes everything way more serious, because these ruins are actually super dangerous and evil. Roran double-checked if she really meant those gross ruins. Then Lapis asked Mr. Ritz for permission to investigate, leaving Roran totally shocked that she actually wanted to stay there. Lapis shook her head and warned them that those ruins were a total disaster waiting to happen, but they had to get out of there fast before another attack hit them. Ritz totally agreed because he never wanted to run into those creepy black goblins again, so Lapis suggested they just use a spell. Chuck played it cool and said he was fine since the meds were already kicking in, even though he was still a bit dizzy from the hit. But Lapis warned him he better see a doctor later because head injuries are no joke. Chuck promised to follow her advice once they got back, and when Ritz asked if he could even walk on his own, he told her to stop asking dumb questions and just give him an order if she needed him to move. Nim stepped in and told him to chill out, but Chuck just shrugged it off, saying he only blacked out for a second after that hit to the head, and he's totally fine to move now. The cult admitted he was in a total mess since he'd used up every bit of his magic, but Chuck noticed that nobody was actually mad at him for it. Ritz admitted things would have been a total mess if the Colts hadn't taken out that black goblin, so he thanked him and said they needed to get out of there fast. Roran noticed Lapis was moving like he knew exactly where to go, So he asked what these monsters were since their skin was rock hard and their bones were super strong, maybe even some kind of high-level goblins. Lapis thought they looked like giant hobgoblins, but Roran argued that there was way more to it than just their height. Lapis asks if he noticed anything weird, and Roran remembers the goblins collecting their dead buddies, but he's pretty sure they aren't doing it for a snack. He was worried because these goblins were acting super weird and there were way too many of them, and Lapis backed him up, saying they definitely weren't normal. Roran thinks you'd only find people like that in these ruins, but then Lapis totally changes her vibe and asks if he's into alchemy or pharmacy, and Roran's like, he's heard of it, but none of his friends are actually into that stuff. Lapis says just knowing they're real is enough, but she warns that alchemists actually experiment on living things, even though Roran points out that normal meds are usually just tested on rats. Lapis asked why they were using rats for these experiments, but Roran told her that kind of info is way above a simple mercenary's pay grade. Lapis says the reason is actually super basic. Rats grow up fast and have tons of babies, so they're perfect for experiments. Roran confirmed they breed super fast and grow up in a flash, basically saying they're just like a bunch of goblins. Lapis knew he was right and told them that the place ahead was a real-deal lab built just for experimenting on goblins. Lapis explains that goblins are super easy to farm since they don't need anything special, and she doesn't feel bad testing on them because even though they're primitive, Lapis knew goblins were the perfect test subjects with no better options, so seeing them used like this proved this place was a legit laboratory. Rockran was shocked at how basic the laboratory actually was, while Lapis explained that goblins are total scavengers who will eat literally anything, from gross trash to actual corpses. Ancient records say goblins cut their trash by a crazy 80%, and Roran totally agreed that these guys are as simple as it gets. Lapis realized that to those ancient people, goblins were just worthless trash no matter how many there were, and she noticed weird new species popping up from their creepy experiments. Roran wondered if they'd seen these types before, and just as Lapis confirmed these ruins were a total goblin nest, a fresh wave of them ambushed the squad. Lapis said this was way worse than just breeding, because these goblins were being messed with and changed in some seriously dark ways. Roran was totally confused, so Lapis explained that this wasn't a normal farm at all, but a place where they were literally forcing creatures to change and evolve. Roran asks what she means, so Lapis breaks it down. They're basically researching how to buff goblins, but even though a huge pack is chasing them, none have evolved yet. She thinks these goblins were messed with so they'd never evolve into hobgoblins or mages, since the researchers thought making them stronger was just a total waste of time. Roaring was stressing because those goblins were massive, but Lapis just stayed chill and said a big goblin is still just a goblin. The guests mentioned that the goblins outside managed to slip through the cracks and escape, including a powerful mage. But Lapis pointed out that the ones inside the ruins hadn't really changed yet. The moment they stepped outside, they started transforming, and she's convinced those ruins were dead for ages until someone finally powered them back up. Maybe some outsider turned the system back on or an open passage triggered the restart. But Roran just wanted to know why it would be so bad to just leave it alone. Lapis explains that those massive black goblins are actually super soldiers made right in this lab. But their creepy behavior is what's really freaking her out. And when Roran asks, she figured there was a machine in the ruins spawning new goblins. So since they didn't need to reproduce the normal way, they just finished off any female adventurers they caught. She shared a scary story about a goblin attacking Mrs. Nim and trying to rip her clothes off, and Lapis made it clear that this wasn't just about them trying to have babies. She's convinced this goblin is actually part human, probably created by one of Mr. Ritz's rivals and his crew. Lauren is totally fuming and says there's no way this thing should be called a goblin, but Lapis shuts her down, arguing that it's still a goblin at heart, and even with a human mom, nobody calls them half-breeds, so they're still just goblins. The scariest part was that these goblins were actually evolving and getting way stronger, showing they were just as smart as humans and could learn anything, leaving Roran totally speechless as he realized how bad things. Lapis reminded everyone about that super sketchy thing they noticed earlier, where the goblins were actually gathering up their own dead friends. She thinks these bodies are being used as parts to build new monsters, and since they're using veteran goblins, the new ones are way stronger, meaning if this loop keeps going, this goblin wasn't just strong, he was super smart, and had tons of battle experience, so Lapis asked Roran to explain exactly what kind of mess they were in. Roran didn't waste a second asking how to shut the ruins down, but Lapis admitted she didn't have a clue anymore, leaving him totally crushed because he really thought she was the only one who could stop them. Lapis explains that every ruin is unique with no single way to shut them down, and while she insists she knows her stuff, a totally stunned Roran can only mumble in disbelief. Lapis calls him out for that weird look on his face, making Roran stop in his tracks to wonder what he looks like and where they're even headed next. Lapis says they need to hit up the ancient private rooms first, hoping the old rulers left behind some secret notes or documents that explain exactly what's going on. Roaring was totally blown away, but Lapis explained that while teleportation magic links the cities and labs, it drains so much mana she's not even sure it's worth the trouble. Lauren wasn't sure if all this effort was even worth it, but Lapis figured that if the ancients really had teleporters, they probably built a massive base where they could live for a long time. Roran wasn't buying it, but Lapis was sure the staff lived nearby, so she headed off to find a way to shut down the ruins and snag any sweet loot she could find for herself. Roar told her to watch her mouth about stealing, but Lapis just shrugged it off, saying the owners have been dead for centuries, so it's not even a crime anymore. Roran shrugged and said they should just grab all the loot, so Lapis agreed, figuring the ancients shut this place down themselves and left the secret files scattered all over the place. Roran asks what the move is, but Lapis just keeps it short and admits she's totally clueless too. Roran knew they were still in a huge mess since goblins could jump them any second. Chuck was wounded, Colts was totally out of mana, and while Ritz and Nim were still good to go, Roran was finally starting to feel exhausted. He realized his sword was on its last legs and would totally snap after just a few more goblins, making Lapis freak out and tell him he needed a new one right away. Rohan decided to wait until the weapon was totally busted before making a choice, focusing on getting intel first, and with Lapis backing him up, they finally reached the living quarters. She gave a nasty smirk and told everyone that Rob was going first. Rorn immediately went on guard and asked if it was really safe with all the traps around, but Lapis told him to chill since she knows these ruins inside and out. Ritz hesitated, asking if it was actually okay for him to do that. Lapis checked out the room but was totally bummed to find absolutely nothing useful, so she told everyone to just move on to the next one. Roran looked her in the eye and said she's way better than the rest, so they can definitely count on her. Nim scanned the room and realized this was actually the home of people from a super ancient civilization. Ritz said all this stuff is just a legacy from the past, so he told them to grab the loot and bail since they already finished the survey and have all the info they need. Lapis didn't mind and said they were free to leave, but Ritz insisted they all stick together since they had no clue what they were up against and needed to tell the bosses so they could decide what to do next. Lapis flashed a smile and said they'd need to call in the gold and mithril rankers, but getting them all together is going to be a massive challenge. Ritz realized this was a crazy hard mission since there are only a few hundred gold ranks, a few dozen mithril ranks, and less than 10 top-tier crimson gold users in the entire world. Lapis told them she wouldn't stop them if they wanted to bail, and while she'd pray for their safety, she warned that there was absolutely nothing good for them in those ruins. Roar realized she sounded way too mean, but Lapis reminded her that you can't just force someone to follow you. Ron just smirked and asked if he should go chase her down. Lapis was super confused and asked if he really stayed, but Roran told her they were in this mess together now and he couldn't just bail. Lapis let out a huge sigh of relief, admitting she was totally toast without his help, and after thanking him, she teased some big news that Roran immediately asked to hear. Lapis was super hyped because she found some old records about these ruins that show exactly how to shut them down. Roran was blown away that she could read that ancient language, but Lapis just flexed that she's a priestess for the god of knowledge. Rowan smirked and asked if every priestess was a genius, but Lapis bragged that while there are plenty of smart people, she's one of a kind, so Rowan got straight to the point and asked what the plan was. Lapis figured there had to be a control panel nearby, and once she found the switch to shut everything down, she told the group they needed to get there right now. Ritz overheard the whole thing and asked if they really found something, so Lapis told him they got super lucky and asked what he wanted to do. Ritz didn't even hesitate and said Lapis totally agreed and said they had to rush to the control room to stop this whole mess once and for all. One guy remembers his first day at the guild, and it turns out Ritz signed up at that exact same branch on that very same day. They both started their journey at the same time, and even though they never really hung out after that, Ritz's name just kept popping up until he was so famous that the rumors were impossible to ignore. Maybe Ritz was just built different or something big happened during their research, but their paths totally split. Even though they started as equals, Ritz leveled up way faster and hit silver rank first, turning him into the ultimate rival he'd have to chase forever. His friends saw him acting all moody and started roasting him about Mr. Ritz, but he suddenly snapped and told them all to shut up. He was actually hyped for this chance to show everyone, and himself, what he was really made of. And later, an admin girl explained they had to check out the ruins by the village vine, so they were sending. She said the better the info, the bigger the payday, and the guy knew this was his chance to finally see who was the best. The second Ritz introduced himself as the leader, the guy got super annoyed by his calm vibe and realized he had to step up his game so he wouldn't look weak. One of the girls on his team was totally hyped to see the real Mr. Ritz standing right there, but another friend couldn't get over how weird this coincidence was. The girl immediately hyped Nim up, calling her gorgeous and saying all elves are stunning, while Chuck joked that she was pretty too, and another teammate mentioned they'd heard all about Mr. Colt's crazy magic skills. Ritz looked pretty annoyed and demanded to know how they found out his secrets, but the guys just said everyone was talking about his crew and their boss was actually a massive fan. The guy got all salty and tried to make excuses, totally denying he was a fan and claiming he only remembered them because they started out at the exact same time. He reminded everyone that Ritz was his target for the mission, but since they were already chatting, he figured they should finally get to know each other. He yelled to Ritz that they both started as adventurers on the exact same day, but Ritz had already totally surpassed him. The guy admits he's actually pretty interested, so he throws down a challenge. If his squad explores the ruins better, Ritz will have to remember him as his rival. He calls his crew over and starts leading the way, while one of his buddies asks if he's ever going to give a real introduction, and another notices that Ritz actually looks pretty impressed. But his crew was totally hyped, promising that the enemy would finally have to respect him, and as they vowed to stay by his side, he shouted that they were definitely going to be the ones who win. Chuck watched the whole thing and whispered rivals, while Ritz just gave a slow nod. As soon as the other guys left, Ritz's team got together to figure out their game. Ritz muttered to himself that he should probably figure out the name of the person who actually summoned him. Once things shifted, a heartbroken Nim suggested finding the group's tokens so they could at least give them a burial if they needed to. Lapis says the plans for these ruins are finally here, so they need to get moving right now. She told everyone to hurry up, because the faster they reached that control room, the sooner they could stop all this madness. She says the guy who used to run this place was actually a super chill and responsible dude. He didn't leave behind any weird mysteries or crazy locks that were impossible to open, and Lapis said if he'd been any sneakier, she would have had to dig into his past and force the truth out of him. Roran wondered how Lapis knew so much about these ruins, but he got a bad vibe about the truth and decided it was better to just keep his mouth shut. Lapis totally read the room and just calmly said he got all that info from books. Ritz looked around and warned the squad that those goblins could jump them at any moment, complaining about how gross and nasty this job was while Roran totally agreed. He thought this was just a simple scouting mission, but these ruins were way more dangerous than anyone expected, and Lapis looked at Lauren knowing he probably thought they were the unluckiest crew alive for. Roran was blown away by how right she was and asked if she could read minds, but Lapis just said his face gives everything away and he needs to watch his expressions. She pointed out that Mr. Ritz's enemies actually had it way worse, and Roran slowly nodded like he couldn't even argue with that. Lapis told everyone to shut up since they were finally there and waved them all inside. Lauren looked around thinking things were finally getting easy, but Lapis warned her not to celebrate yet because they still had one massive job left to do. She pointed at the panel and told them they could use it to control every single part of the ruins. Rockran asks if she can handle the gear. Lapis gives a confident nod saying she's totally got this, and right then Chuck shouts that the doors are finally open. Lapis was acting all cool like she had it covered, but she completely locked up the second those weird red symbols appeared on the screen. She said the system just wouldn't stop and they had to trigger the control function, but since the code was actually perfect, the whole situation was getting really creepy. Roran asks why the machine isn't working if it's built right, But Lapis snaps that she'd have fixed it by now if she knew, guessing the device just got glitchy over the centuries. If that's really the reason, she's got zero chance of fixing that device. And Ritz totally panicked when he saw red symbols taking over the whole screen while Roran demanded to know what the mum. Lapis was totally sure they'd found the lab and its offices, and even though Roran hated to admit it, he knew she was probably right. Lapis explains that anyone touching the control organs has to be in the lab's system. So Roran looks at her and asks what she even means by that. Ritz yells that 2 doors just flew open at the same time, making Chuck freak out in total confusion until Lapis calmly explains it was just a biometric scanning error. Only the scientists were allowed to touch this thing at first, so since she wasn't on the list, she couldn't even hit the stop button, and those red symbols popping up meant the scanner. She warned them that 3 strikes meant a total lockout, and since they kept mashing buttons anyway, the system shut down and left them completely helpless. The system just flagged them as targets and switched to attack mode, so now this thing is officially trying to wipe them out. Ritz warned that things were getting way too dangerous and demanded a real plan. But Roran was still totally lost and asked him to break it down even simpler. Lapis basically said the system knows they shouldn't be there and is sending goblins to kill them, and since the exit is blocked, they're trapped right next to the monster factory. She knew a huge crowd was about to swarm the place, and she'd have to hold them all back while Ritz just grumbled and went along with the plan. Lapis apologized and promised to outsmart the system to delete the goblins, but she'd be totally defenseless while doing it, and Ritz was super suspicious about why she even thought she could pull it off. Lapis calmly explains she's a priestess for the god of knowledge, so she knows her power is the real deal. But Roar asks if she actually has an explanation for all this craziness. Lapis stood her ground and swore she wasn't lying, so Roran just nodded and told her to get back to work. He swore they'd hold their ground against the enemy, and Lapis thanked them, saying she was putting all her trust in their hands. Nim shouts that the goblins are closing in, and Ritz knows they have to stand their ground since the narrow doors will help them hold the line. He told Nima to guard the machine and watch Lapis's back, then asked Chuck if he was ready, and Chuck just gritted his teeth and said he'd handle it even though he was totally fed up with everything. Ritz looks over at Roran and tells him it's his turn now, and Roran just smirks, saying he's totally ready to go. They started fighting back against the goblin swarm, taking them out one by one. Suddenly, a black goblin showed up looking way deadlier than the rest, so Chuck told Colts to stick by Lapis since he was too beat up to fight, leaving Colts to hang his head, and Lauren stared down the black goblin and made it clear that he was taking it on. He kept swinging at the black goblin with everything he had left, putting every last bit of his power into every single hit. Roran felt his sword about to snap from slamming it against that monster's tough skin, and he knew the blade wouldn't survive one more big hit. He yelled over to Lapis, demanding to know how much longer she was going to be working. Lapis didn't even look up from the panel as she promised to be fast, but she warned them that this ancient kingdom tech is way too complex to crack in just a few minutes. She figured they'd be done in an hour, but Nim was freaking out because she was almost out of arrows and knew they wouldn't last. Colt admits he's down to his very last spell, while Chuck bashes another goblin and yells that these monsters just won't stop coming. Roran's starting to freak out because these monsters are getting way stronger by the second, even tougher than the ones he fought before, and he's totally grossed out watching the goblins constantly drag their dead buddies off the field. Lapis explains that those dead goblins are actually super valuable, and letting the pack take the bodies is a death sentence, while a gasping Chuck admits they would have stopped them ages ago if they actually could. Ritz promises they're doing everything to hold the line, and even though Roran wonders if it's even worth the effort, Lapis reminds him they already made their choice. She explained that goblins don't just keep dead bodies as trophies, they use them to pass on combat skills and power to new monsters, which is exactly why they evolve at such a crazy speed. The manual says it only takes a few seconds to zap all that data into the new body. She explains that this room is literally plugged into the factory where new goblins are made. Roran finally realizes that the longer they keep fighting, the stronger these monsters actually become. The enemy is... Lapis explains that once the system gathers enough data, it spawns a leveled-up goblin that's way more dangerous than the ones they fought before. Chuck was totally shocked when a goblin actually blocked his arrow with a shield, and he realized these monsters were starting to get way smarter with their weapons. Ritz was freaking out, telling everyone to move it before a way stronger enemy showed up. Roran quickly reported that the enemy was already there as a strange new creature showed up, and he jumped right into the fight. The fight just got way more intense. Roaring was freaking out because this new goblin was way stronger than the rest, and its skin was so tough that his attacks didn't even leave a scratch. He let out a massive roar when he saw the goblin smirking at him, and that mocking look made him absolutely snap. He could tell the guy was laughing at him and calling him weak. But Rohan swore in his head that he wouldn't let anyone look down on him or ever give up. Roran kept swinging even though he was totally gassed and using trash gear, but the fight just got more intense and brutal every single second. Looking back, Chuck admitted that those wild rumors about the mercenary were probably the real deal. Roran finally became the legendary mercenary that everyone used to just whisper about. Even though she was totally wiped out, Nim warned them not to let their guard down and told Lauren to start acting like his title actually meant something, because things were getting seriously dangerous. She warned him his sword was about to shatter, and right then, Ritz saw some crazy glitches on the screen and yelled for Lapis in a total panic. Lapis kept her eyes glued to the screen, explaining she'd already put in the codes to shut down the machine and stop the goblins, but the system was straight up refusing to accept her final command. Ritz was absolutely fuming and demanded answers, but Lapis kept it simple. The system wasn't shutting down, and if she actually killed the power, the whole ruin would collapse and stop the goblin production for good. Ritz screams that if the buttons won't work, they should just smash the whole machine to bits. Lapis sounds super serious when she tells him that if he can actually pull that off, smashing the machine would totally work. So Ritz sneaks up, tells Lapis to get back, and swings with everything he's got, but it's a total disaster. His sword just shatters and the machine doesn't have a single scratch. He screamed in total frustration when he realized just how insane their defense really was. Lapis told him a magic charm was protecting the system, so regular hits wouldn't do a thing, and they'd... Right then, Lauren's sword couldn't handle the force and just snapped. Roran stopped to think, replaying every single word they just said in his head. He remembered what Lapis said about that magic shield coating and let out a huge sigh, knowing he had one last shot to make it happen. He told Lapis to get away from the controls, whipped out a goblin mage's pendant, and chucked it straight into the heart of the machine. It suddenly clicked for Lapis that the necklace right in front of her was the exact same one that Goblin Mage used to wear. She knew right away it was the Mana Drain necklace, an item that slowly sucks up magic and saves it for the perfect moment to strike. Lauren remembered that necklace they swiped from the goblin lair, and since it's been a while, he figured it was finally charged up and ready for action. Out of nowhere, a massive boom ripped through the whole building and made the stone walls shake like crazy. Colts felt the magic shift and was shocked to find the barrier had completely vanished instead of just fading away. Chuck looked around and saw way more goblins swarming in, and he started swearing like crazy because they just wouldn't stop coming. Roran didn't hesitate for a second and chucked his busted swords right into the heart of the control system. He lunged forward as that necklace from before suddenly blasted a ton of magic straight into his attack. The moment the defense system was totally trashed, the gears inside sparked and froze before a massive energy pulse blasted through the entire room. Just like that, the goblins started dropping one by one. Their bodies went totally limp and they just stopped moving altogether. Everyone charging in suddenly passed out cold, like someone literally pulled the plug on. Lapis thought she was totally cooked, but since she could still move, she realized the necklace was running low on mana, and that's why the blast range was so small last time. This move totally flipped the script on the fight, and somehow they actually made it out alive. She was blown away that Lauren could think up a crazy plan like that while everything was falling apart. It caught her. She screamed at Loren for being so reckless, but she quickly started panicking when he didn't say a single word back. She rushed over and saw Lauren was totally out cold on the floor. Nim spotted something totally weird on the goblin's body and turned her head to get a better look. Finally, Roran slowly opened his eyes and started to wake up after everything that just went down. Lapis was so relieved to see him open his eyes that she shouted he was finally awake and thanked her lucky stars for bringing him back. Roran was totally annoyed, so he gave Lapis a quick smack on the head and told her she can't just go throwing herself at random guys without a good reason. Lapis caught an attitude and claimed there was nowhere else comfy to sit, but Roran kept his cool and reminded her she could have just used the empty spot on the bed. Lapis was super annoyed, complaining that the bed was so rock-hard her butt might actually fall off, while Rowan looked around and guessed they were stuck in some kind of hospital. Lapis confirmed they were actually in the hospital and asked him to remember the last thing he saw before passing out so she could tell him what happened next. Rowan says the last thing he remembers is hurling his sword straight into the main device, and Lapidus is stoked that his brain is totally fine since his berserker mode was way less of a disaster than everyone else's. Rockran clapped back, pointing out how weird it was that she talked like there were actually good and bad ways to go berserk. Lapis acted a bit surprised and said it was totally obvious, but she told him the real crazy part was what happened after he tossed his sword into the machine. Back at the guild, the leader thanks them for the report on those ruins, and is honestly just hyped that the whole team made it back alive. He told everyone they could finally go grab their prizes from the next admin waiting just around the corner. The tokens they brought back from the ruins were 100% legit, proving they belonged to the silver rank team that tried this quest before them. The guild rep says they already know the leader's name and are heading back to the ruins to scavenge for any leftover loot. So he told everyone to relax because he's taking charge of the whole situation personally. Over on Ritz Street, one of the guys admitted he'd only heard the mystery man's name once, and he figured it'd be way cooler to hear it straight from the man himself. Ritz explained that after hitting the ruins, they barely found one good piece of loot, and once they paid for their gear and medical bills, they were basically bankrupt. Nim tried to stay positive, saying that since everyone made it back in one piece, that was the real victory. The Sex were super grateful they ran into these two strangers who turned out to be the perfect allies. Chuck realized the guy in the control room was on a whole different level, and he started to wonder if he was actually looking at the legendary mercenary from the rumors. He remembered the legends about this guy having a body like the wind, and whenever he moved, he'd absolutely shred everything in his path to pieces. Ritz guessed it might be the mercenary nicknamed Windcutter, but he knew it couldn't be this guy since a legend like that is way too famous to be a low-level bronze adventurer. Chuck argued that even if it wasn't him, no normal group could pull off those insane moves at the same time, and once he remembered the guy was a mercenary, Ritz was totally hooked. Ritz told Chuck that if he has so much time to daydream, he better finish his treatment fast and get back to work. Lapis explains that since the device got trashed, the magic seal broke, triggering the relic's shutdown mode and letting all its power go wild at once. Lapis realized the ruins were totally useless now because the main device was wrecked and some random necklace actually drained all the power from the magic circles. She says no mage alive has the tech to fix this thing, and since Lapis admitted the pay was total trash, Ritz and his squad were totally fed up. Lapis was mostly just joking around, and Roran wasn't even shocked since their research didn't find anything useful anyway. He said that even though the mission was a total fail, it wasn't all bad since they walked away with a massive reward, but Lapis still admitted she crossed a line she never should have touched. Lauren was on the fence about apologizing, but Lapis was already stressing out that any weird drama between them, Ritz, and the rest of the crew would just blow up in their faces. Lapis told everyone she heard they were sealing the ruins once the scouts finished up, since she figured the place was already a wreck, and it was better to be safe than sorry. Roran played it cool and said he got the picture, then asked who exactly brought him there and where this hospital was. Lapis nervously explained that she was the one who dragged him out after he blacked out, since Ritz and the crew were already too beat up to help, and now they're all safe in a city called Cafe. Warren was super annoyed that he caused a mess, but Lapis told him to chill since it wasn't a big deal, even though she had to mention their goblin mission was a total bust. Since 3 of their friends never came back, they couldn't wreck the nest or even prove they killed one goblin, so failing was basically a total guarantee. Suddenly, Rorn remembered that weird bag with ears and asked where it went, but Lapis had to break the bad news that it probably got lost in the fight, which made Rorn totally lose his cool. Lapis thought back to Ritz wanting to get out of there the moment Rohan fainted, since they still weren't sure if they were actually safe. She couldn't grab any goblin parts for proof and didn't want to slow everyone down, so she just ditched the whole idea. Roran was pretty bummed out and said it was a total shame, but at least he made it out alive even though they walked away with absolutely nothing. He admitted those guys were wild but not actually evil, and he made sure to say that Lapis is a pretty good person too. Lapis thanked him quietly, really hoping the scouts could still save those girls since they'd only run into basic goblins so far. So the team got paid absolutely nothing for the mission and actually lost money on the trip, especially since the girl already swiped travel cash from his wallet, and don't even get me started on those massive hospital bills. She told him she paid for everything herself, hoping he'd pay her back one day, and then Ron asked how long he'd been out cold. Lapis told him he'd been gone for 3 days, and after adding up the medical bills and his stay, the total came to 5 silver coins. She told him to chill and said he only had to pay back the original debt with 0 interest, but Roran nervously admitted he still didn't have the cash. Lapis kept it chill and told him he could pay in small chunks over time, but Roran was super suspicious because the deal sounded way too good to be real. Right then, Lapis realized she'd done this all on purpose, chasing him down and blowing every last cent until she was totally broke. Lapis knew she was being pretty cold by making him feel like he owed her, but she honestly didn't care. She finally told him straight up that since she'd spent so much helping him, Roran had to join her on her journey. Lapis realized that if she teams up with this swordsman, they'll finally have enough people to start taking on quests. She figured this team-up was the perfect way to keep those annoying parasites away, while finally showing everyone that their squad was actually legit and ready to show off their real power. Even with her insane demon powers, she knew that traveling solo while pretending to be a priestess was going to be a massive headache. She noticed that Roran, a total beast of a warrior, knew exactly where she came from and that everyone hated her kind, but he still treated her the same and never looked at her any differently. This proved he was super tough and totally reliable, and now she didn't just see him as a teammate, but as the hero who saved her life. Lapis decided to forget about their money problems for a second and pushed for a team-up, telling Roran that hitting the road with the priestess would be a total game-changer for him. She said the deal looked totally fair and thought it was a huge win for them. Rockran sounded pretty defeated as he admitted he was backed into a corner and had to say yes, so Lapis asked if they finally had a deal since she really needed to be sure. Roar agreed, but on one condition. They're only partners until he pays her back for all his medical bills, rent, and travel costs. Lapis was totally down with his plan and promised to make it happen, saying she couldn't wait to work with him. But Roran just nervously agreed while asking her to please stop sitting on him already. Lapis kept a secret to herself because this mission was actually a huge win for her, and while everyone else was distracted hunting for the manual, she snatched up some pricey treasures so smoothly that even a pro thief would have missed it. Since almost everything she grabbed was magical, she figured that medallion was from the same room and worth a ton, so she wasn't even sweating about money anymore. Lapis felt a little bad that Lauren's debt was about to skyrocket and she was definitely gonna milk it, but she was actually super hyped for their next big adventure. She swore to stay right by Roran's side and follow him to the very end, no matter how insane things got. 2 guys are huddled together talking about some seriously bad news, and while one looks totally freaked out saying another village was just wiped off the map, the other guy doesn't even blink, saying, they realized this was all just a plot to grab more farmland and squeeze everyone for taxes, which only helps the rich guys get richer. They say those rich elites are the ones grabbing all this new land, so they have to give the peasants some actual protection if they're being sent into such a dangerous place. One guy straight up said that even if these poor people lose their homes and die, nobody will even blink. Because in this world, money is the only thing that counts. Roran watched them and totally agreed, realizing that whether you're a king, a mercenary, or just a regular villager, everyone is obsessed with money, and nobody ever gives it up for free. Rowan starts blowing through his cash so fast that Lapis just stares in shock, teasing him that he must have been drinking since the second he woke up. She knew he'd been stuck in the hospital for 2 days and totally got why he needed a drink, even if she doubted he had the cash. Looking totally wiped out, Lauren admitted his mercenary squad was destroyed, leaving him with no choice but to become an adventurer. His first mission was a total nightmare, but now that it's finally over, he won't say if he actually pulled it off, only that he's not traveling alone anymore. Lapis tried to hold back her lecture, warning him that drinking on an empty stomach after being sick is a total disaster, but Rokran just reminded her he's way too broke to even buy a drink. Lapis stayed super cheerful and said she'd pay for her own meal. Then she ordered an egg sandwich without mustard for herself and a ham one for Lauren. Rowan realized Lapis is actually a total genius, and he started thinking she's way too smart to just be a priestess for the god of knowledge. As Lapis tells the waitress to put everything on the tab, Rowan starts overthinking things again. He knows she's a total powerhouse who can use both holy and dark magic. Everything was getting way more complicated than he expected, so he just let out a huge sigh while Roran found out a ham sandwich costs 5 copper coins, exactly like the egg one. He felt pretty down as his debt kept piling up, but Lapis stayed positive and told him they couldn't just sit around doing nothing. Roran was only an adventurer because he was dead broke, but ever since he met Lapis, his first mission in these ancient ruins almost got him killed. That fight was absolutely brutal, and even though he survived, he lost everything. So now Lapis is footing the bill and he's stuck working for her until he pays back every single cent. Lapis takes a bite and realizes the food is actually amazing, while Rohan, still stressing about his massive debts, decides he's gotta have a taste too. Lapis politely told him it was time to get moving, even though Roran was heading into the job totally unarmed. He sighed, saying he could only do lame jobs like cleaning ditches without his sword. But Lapis shut that down immediately because she didn't want her new partner smelling like a sewer. She told him she had a fix for that nasty smell and would let him work if he used it. But Roran was already worried she'd take the cost out of his pay, so Lapis told everyone to save the heavy talk for later and just focus on the food. But Roran wasn't buying it since he thought the whole situation was actually pretty simple. One guy realized how smart he was, because even though he's just a low-level copper rank, he already found a girl to take care of him, and now everyone else is totally jealous. Warren clocked their iron rank badges, and while Lapis told him to just ignore them, he knew that if you let bullies like this get away with it once, they'll never stop. Lapis figured it was just a mercenary thing, so she didn't waste her energy getting mad at their trash talk since those losers were clearly just jealous that no one was looking out for. She said it out loud, and those same two guys heard her, with one of them rudely snapping and asking what she just said. Roaring was totally on edge and ready to scrap, deciding he'd even take them out for good if he had to. But Lapis warned him that killing would just turn them into wanted criminals in the eyes of the guild. She warned them that 90% of adventurer fights end in a total disaster, so they better stay cool and keep their hands out of people's pockets unless they want to get caught stealing in. Roran barely says a word to keep from blowing up, but Lapis stays totally cool, telling him she's got more than enough cash to pay for the damages if he decides to go wild and trash the place. Two guys watching nearby started talking major trash, and one of them told her he'd only forgive her if she got on her knees, acting like she was nothing just because she's a girl. They bragged about how useful a priestess could be, and since Roran was already done with her, they decided it was finally their turn to get violent. Lapis absolutely lost it when she heard that, calling them total creeps for saying such trashy things in front of an innocent girl. Lapis finally had to admit that no matter what she did, she always ended up in a massive brawl. Once things finally chilled out, Lapis suggested they go pick some healing herbs, since it's a super easy way to make some quick cash. Roran was totally on board and said the job was just gathering healing herbs in the nearby woods, and since it was super safe from monsters, they wouldn't even need to carry weapons. Lapis says each plant is worth 2 copper coins, so Roran has to find 705 of them just to pay back what he owes. Roran begged her not to make his life any harder, but Lapis acted like it was totally fine, so he asked why she was even out there picking herbs by herself. Lapis admitted she needs to make some bank so she can keep lending Roran cash, and she teased him for being way too lazy and missing out on big scores. Roran admits he's pretty bad at this, but says if it were a real fight, he'd have finished it by now. Lapis reminds him he doesn't even have a weapon. Lapis calmly said there was no stopping it since so many people were demanding it. So she told Roran it was time to bail, and he finally gave in and agreed they should head back. Lapis reminds everyone that a room is 30 copper, food is 5 to 7, and a drink is 2, so they're looking at spending 45 to 5. Even after finishing Roran's job, he'd still be totally stuck. So she suggested giving him some cash and buying him the gear he needed to get back on his feet. Roran straight up said that copper rank adventurers wouldn't stand a chance here, and he seriously doubted they'd even survive. Lapis keeps it real and says most adventurers are broke and doing dumb, risky jobs for cash, and if they mess up, they're toast. So her plan is to hit iron rank ASAP and find a squad she can actually count on. Rowan realized this world was totally brutal, but hey, at least those mercenaries were paying him enough to make it worth it. He said the commander and the accountant were the ones who really pulled this off, but Lapis just said life goes on and asked if she should start carrying her gear. Roar suddenly cut her off and told her to be quiet because he heard someone nearby, so Lapis said they should probably run before things got dangerous. Roar thought the idea made sense, but he had a totally bad vibe, and as soon as he saw the girl, he called her over. Lapis was totally shocked because she had no clue how she ended up there, but Lauren just figured she probably got lost. Lapis takes a good look and notices the girl is barefoot, but her feet aren't hurt and her clothes are perfectly clean, so there's no way she got here on her own. He let out a massive roar and looked around exhausted, but the second he saw the girl, he could tell something was super weird about her. Lapis suddenly saw something moving in the trees and screamed that forest wolves were jumping them. Rockran didn't even hesitate to step up, saying it was an honor to protect the girl and that he'd take on the wolves alone to save her. Lapis didn't argue, but she did point out he was totally unarmed and warned him the fight would be way harder, though Roran just acted cool and said he'd be totally fine without one. He bragged that he didn't even need a sword to take out those losers he called dogs. Lapis felt a wave of sadness hit her, wondering if he seriously just called those scary monsters dogs. After the wolf fight, Roran asked if they could eat the meat, but Lapis told him it was gross and they should just sell the skins. Too bad Roran didn't have a knife to actually get the job done. Feeling guilty, he checked on the unconscious girl, but Lapis looked her over and luckily found no injuries, confirming the baby was safe and that they'd saved her from being wolf food. Rowan thinks life is a total balancing act, so if this girl is super lucky, someone else has to be miserable, and Lapis points out that there's probably some poor soul out there having the absolute worst day of their life right now. Roran asked what they should do with the girl, and while Lapis insisted they couldn't leave her behind, Roran was worried that bringing her to the city would just cause a ton of trouble and make everyone suspicious. Lapis had a total big brain move. They'd just drop the girl off at the guild once they hit the city so the pros could look after her, and then Roran walked over to carefully scoop her up. Lapis notices them moving and asks what's up, but Rokren just says the girl is weirdly light for her size, leaving Lapis totally confused since she looks a bit chubby and definitely shouldn't weigh that little. Roran's totally stressed, hoping the girl will just explain everything when she wakes up so they don't look like kidnappers, while Lapis jokes about how they look like two total creeps snatching an innocent girl. Roran snapped that he wasn't some shady villain, but he realized that meeting this mystery girl was the start of a wild new journey full of danger. Roran and Lapis just strolled right into the city, and nobody even looked twice or tried to stop them. Lapis realized things would be way different if they were actually bad guys, because getting through those gates would have been a total nightmare. But with the priestess by their side, they could just stroll. Roran was totally blown away by how much respect the priestess got, and Lapis mentioned that people trust them way more than just some random travelers. They reached Kaffa and headed straight to the Guild of Avengers, where a staff member was already waiting to ask if they saved that guy in the forest. She probably already knew the answer anyway. Roran swore he wasn't lying and told her to go see for herself, so she said the guild would take responsibility for whatever they found and asked if they had a problem with that. Roran was totally cool with it since he didn't plan on sticking with the girl forever anyway. So the guild rep led them to a private room to explain the situation. Roaring tried to clear the air by saying it wasn't a kidnapping, and the guild rep totally got it since no kidnapper would be dumb enough to bring a victim here. So she cut the talk and got straight to business. She looked super awkward as she dropped the news that the guild was putting Roran and Lapis on lockdown, and Roran was totally caught off guard. Lapis asked if they were being suspected of something, but the guild rep promised they weren't in any trouble and no charges were being filed. She explained the guild is just checking the girl's identity and told them to stay put. But Lapis got super worried and asked if something bad had happened to her. The guild lady says she can't give a straight answer right now, so Rar starts demanding to know exactly what these new rules are and how long they're going to be stuck with them. The guy told him it'd take a few days to see any results, and the guild ordered Roran to stay at a specific hotel in town, but this whole talk just made him feel way more on edge. The guild rep points them to a spot on the main street called Monogotsvitya, and while Roran is totally clueless, Lapis mentions it's actually the fanciest and most expensive hotel in the entire city. The guild rep said they're paying for the hotel and everything else, and if they need anything at all, they just have to call and the guild will cover it. Roran called them out, saying the guild smells a rat when someone acts this nice, and no real mercenary would ever fall for a sketchy promise of mountains of gold. Lapis suggests they just play dumb, but Rokren points out that goes against everything he stands for, and Lapis admits he's actually totally against it. Roran asked about the girl again, but Lapis demanded some real answers, making it clear they weren't going to be held back or put in danger without knowing why. The guild guy says that's basically impossible since hardly anyone knows her, and they'll just have to wait a few days for her to wake up and tell them what's going on. Lapis realized the guild is double-checking the girl's identity, so he and Rorn are stuck together until they prove they aren't involved. He figures that once the guild believes they just stumbled onto the girl in the woods, they'll stop being suspicious and keep paying for their stay at the inn. Ron asked if the guild was really going to handle the tavern and the cash, and the rep said they'd take care of everything before asking if he wanted a double room. Roan put his foot down and said they needed separate rooms or the deal was off, and after Lapis agreed to make it official, he told the priestess he was totally against living together. Rowan eventually guesses that the girl from the woods isn't from around here and might actually be a noble from some far-off place. Lapis thinks it's super sketchy being stuck in the middle of the woods with no towns in sight, wondering what really went down, but for now, she says they should just enjoy this luxury hotel while waiting for the guild to call, before asking Satellite if she's totally wiped out. Roran dodges the question and says he totally hates this feeling, because his body is acting super weird and heavy, and he can't even flex his muscles or control how he moves. Lapis told him that even though his mind was back to normal, his body was still totally beat up, and Roran just stood there, not sure if he should actually go along with it. 2 days later, a girl from the guild shows up to tell them they're officially cleared, meaning they're finally free to go wherever they want. She thanked them for the help and told them they were finally free to make their own moves. Lapis was totally thrown off by how short the update was and wondered why they weren't told what actually went down. The guild rep basically said they're the ones who decide who gets the scoop, and you've got to be at least an iron ranker to hear any of it. Lapis started complaining, saying they deserved answers since they were the ones who brought the girl in, but Roran suddenly stepped in and shut her down, leaving her totally shocked. Roran explained his crew serves the god of knowledge and they're obsessed with digging up every secret, which totally caught the guild lady off guard, but she reminded him that the guild still makes the final call. Rowan played it cool and backed off since she couldn't talk, but he still asked if the info reached the right people, and if there was any way to track. The guild rep confirmed the secret was already safe with a trustworthy group. Ravrin figured they were officially cleared, so he announced they were checking out of the hotel right then and there. Lapis was totally stressed and demanded to know the plan, but Roran told her to leave the girl alone since she wouldn't talk, and if she accidentally let the secret slip, she'd be in huge trouble. He pointed out that getting info from someone sworn to silence is a total waste of time, so they needed to find someone allowed to talk, and Lapis asked Roran if he knew exactly who that was. Roran's totally sure of himself since he knows the guy's name and face, so he says they'll get this done super fast. Lapis grabbed Warren's hand with total hard eyes, and when he tried to protest, she looked him dead in the face and told him she was lost, so he needed to stop stalling and start leading the way right now. Roran hit up a local spot and started asking around to get the scoop on everything he needed to know. Roan finally walks back over to the guy and says it feels like forever since they last talked, even though it's only been a bit, and tells him to grab a seat so they can finish their chat. Chuck is totally caught off guard and asks how they found him, so Roran explains they just asked around while Lapis mentions it cost 30 copper coins to get the info, but she paid it herself and tells Chuck it's been way too long since they last saw each other. Chuck realized who they were and told his sister to grab 2 more drinks, but Roran turned him down while still saying thanks for the offer. Chuck wouldn't back down, insisting that since they helped out so much, he just had to treat them to something to say thanks. Lapis felt like they'd done nothing and lost all their hard work, but Chuck told her to stop talking crazy because even if the money's gone, the most important thing is that they're still alive. He admitted he was pretty salty earlier, but since that's in the past, he raised a glass to their meeting while Roran apologized for the awkward situation. Chuck told them he was totally cool and not even mad, but he knew they weren't there for small talk, so when he asked what was really going on, Roran admitted they'd... Chuck was totally stunned to see them, but then it clicked. Only Iron Ranks knew about this secret, which is exactly why they came looking for him. Ravrin said his partner just wanted some info on the girl, but Chuck shut her down, reminding her that a silver rank adventurer like him doesn't just hand out secrets for free. He says that weak adventurers who brag about their jobs almost never make it to silver rank. Ropin was totally caught off guard by how honest they were, so after talking it over with his partner, they decided Chuck was the only guy who could sell them that kind of info. Chuck remembered Rohan saved his life, so he offered a deal to spill the beans as long as they kept his name out of it. and Rohan promised he wouldn't let anything bad happen to him. Lapis promised she'd keep her word and thanked him politely, so Chuck gave them the thumbs up while warning that the info might be fake, and it's totally up to them what they do next. He told them he already knew her deal, saying her name is Sina Lombartia, and she's from the city-state of Hans. Roar was still processing the name Hansa when Lapis explained, "It's a tiny nation 3 days south of Kaffa, and even though she'd never heard of Senna, the name Lombartia belongs to the royal family that runs the whole place." Rockran was totally shocked by how much Lapis knew, so she just laughed and asked if he was going to hype her up too. But then Chuck cut in to reveal that Senna was... Roran wanted to know why they had to stay frozen when they first grabbed the girl. Chuck told him the answer was actually super simple. Gil just didn't want anyone spoiling the secret too. Finding a noble girl alone in the woods is a total magnet for drama and rumors, and even though you'd usually get a reward for helping, he warns they won't get anything at all. Look, nobody asked for help and no one could even prove she was really Senna, but Lapis figured he'd have the whole truth in just 2 days. Chuck played dumb and said he knew nothing, but he could tell they were already suspecting the girl was actually real, while Roran figured the messenger to Hansa just hadn't arrived yet since it. Lapis remembered those messengers usually carry magic trackers, so he figured the organization had totally lost his signal. Chuck saw the guild didn't really care about Hans, but they didn't want to make him mad, so they just rounded up some iron-ranked teams to take the girl. The guild is officially trying to get back into the Hanseatic League, but since the pay was total garbage, all the silver-rank pros refused the job, and Loren thinks this info isn't even a big deal. Chuck agreed, but he warned them that the guild keeps its secrets on lock and doesn't just hand out info to low-level copper ranks. Lapis wondered how to get his hands on that info, but Chuck warned him that it takes way more than just a high rank. Lapis gave a little smirk and said she was just curious, because it's pretty crazy that a pampered noble who's always been protected is suddenly all alone in the middle of a dangerous forest 3 days away from home. She's totally hyped and says it makes sense to want every single detail, but Roran points out that since they're only bronze rank, the guild leaders won't even talk to them, until Lapis hints there might be a secret way to get around the rules. Everyone said it was impossible, but Chuck overheard them and revealed the method actually exists, making Lapis super curious to find out the secret. Chuck said that if a silver rank pro vouches for you, even a copper ranker can jump up and act like an iron rank for a bit. If Ritz had just sent the request himself with a shout-out from Chuck's crew, Roran and Lapis totally could have joined. And just as Lapis started hyping up the big, he had to make sure Chuck was 100% sure about this, because if they failed, they were all toast, and his reputation would be ruined. Chuck kept it chill and promised there'd be no trouble, knowing Ritz would agree. And while Roran didn't have to join, Chuck told him he'd need some serious weapons if he decided to jump in. Roran tried to explain himself, saying he needed to fix the weapon mess first before talking about the deal, so he asked Chuck for just 1 day to get it sorted. Chuck laughs and calls Roran a total wimp who's whipped, but Roran just grumbles that he already knows. Chuck told Roran they'd talk tomorrow if he actually came up with a plan, and he promised the silver rank guys weren't coming, so their recommendation was totally safe. Roran says he totally trusts him and immediately hits up Lapis for some cash. And when a shocked Lapis asks if he's buying a massive sword, Roran just says he wouldn't be bugging Chuck and the others if it was just for a weapon. Lapis gets all business and asks Chuck when the shipment is going out, and he tells her it depends on how the girl is doing, but it should be ready in about 3 days. Lapis felt bad once she understood the situation, so she apologized and offered to lend Roran some cash, but told him to hang tight while she went to grab more. Rockran said he'd figure it out later and wait for her, but Lapis was already hyped and ready to start the job right now. Chuck joked that Roran wasn't busy and should stay, since they were both struggling with falling for super weird girls, but Roran cautiously asked how he even figured that out. Chuck just waved it off and said he totally gets it since he's been in the same boat, admitting Nim always bossed him around. But honestly, dealing with that flat-bottomed girl's constant nagging isn't even that bad after all. Even her bad attitude was actually kind of cute, and Rockran just grinned, knowing she'd turn him into a hedgehog if she ever caught him thinking that. Lapis walks in the next morning and is totally shocked they stayed there all night. Then Nim pops up out of nowhere asking where Chuck is. Lapis says hi and mentions it's been way too long, but Nim just shrugs and says it hasn't actually been that long at all. Lapis apologized for totally forgetting to find a new place after the breakup, but she already snagged a spot and moved her stuff, telling him not to sweat it since Mr. Roran barely. Rowan thanked her but was totally confused how she even got inside. So Lapis explained she just told them they were partners, and they let her right in, making Rowan realize that being in the guild basically gives them a free pass. Nim walks over to wake Chuck up, and when Lapis asks if she's there for him, Nim says she's totally there to take away that worthless man. Warren said they were just hanging out, but he basically spent the whole time listening to Chuck go on and on about his love life. Nim tells Lauren he's a total saint and tells Lapis she should follow his lead, making Lapis scowl and ask if that means she's the bad guy. Nim told her not to sweat it and said she'd tell Ritz that Chuck was just flexing in front of some rookies. Then she promised to take care of everything and said her goodbyes. Roran watched her walk away and suggested they apologize later, but a flustered Lapis insisted it was fine and asked if she was really that bad, though Roran just told her he wasn't one to judge and didn't want to talk about it. Lapis took one look at Roran's trashed gear and told him to hit up the weapon shop for new weapons and armor, because you can't be a real adventurer if your equipment is literally falling apart. Rockran sounded pretty bummed while looking at his old gear, saying it had never failed him since his mercenary days, but Lapis promised to find him the perfect replacements and told him to just trust her. The second they stepped into the armory, Lapis spoke up and reminded Rorant that he's the one who specializes in pure offense. She insisted he needed something way tougher than basic leather and pointed out a specific item, but Roaring was totally shocked because it didn't even look like armor. Lapis revealed that the cloak might look basic, but it's actually a magic item woven from Black Widow silk that's insanely strong and packed with special powers. She explained that the gear has shield and self-repair spells for only 5 gold coins, which is a total steal at 10 times cheaper than the normal price. And since Lapis knew wearing it over leather armor would make them way tougher, Rorant was super suspicious and asked if that 10 times price jump was just a total lie. But Lapis explained that the real problem is the sellers don't even know how valuable their own stuff is. She says the owner probably has no clue how much this is worth, so they need to grab it right now before anyone realizes and raises the price. Lapis was mid-sentence when she suddenly froze, noticing the item she needed was gone, so she asked the seller where it went, figuring someone else must have already snatched it up. The shop owner shot back that it hadn't sold because it was way too big for the floor, so he stashed it in the back, and Lapis was actually pretty shocked he could even move it. The owner waved his hand and admitted he had a whole crew helping him, since there's no way one person could do this alone. So when Lapis tried to take the item back, he stopped. Roran looked around and realized that even though the shop was tiny, it was actually packed with some pretty solid gear. He figured he'd buy more weapons once he finally had the cash, but since he was broke for now, he just kept his eyes on a really sick-looking long sword. Just then this dude walks in like he owns the place, and suddenly every eye in the room is on him. He storms into the shop, yells at Roran to get his hands off the sword, and claims he's been wanting that blade for ages. The guy smugly admits Roran has good taste, but says a weapon this epic is wasted on a brainless meathead, telling him to go practice his moves while he just steals the sword for himself. The shopkeeper thanked him for coming, but Roran was still super broke and wondered who this person was standing right in front of him. Lapis noticed Roran looking totally bummed out and asked what was wrong, but he just brushed it off like everything was cool, even though she saw the sword in the display case was gone and figured someone had already snatched it up. She said the sword was cool, but she already had something way better ready for him, showing off a new blade that was awesome but still didn't compare to what she picked for Lauren. Roran was totally stunned because he couldn't believe Lapis actually found such a legendary blade that's basically only meant for the world's strongest heroes. Lapis crunched the numbers and realized they were in deep, because after buying 50 silver armor, a 5 gold cloak, a 15 gold sword, and a bunch of extra gear, their total debt hit a key. Lauren was just glad Lapis finally forgave him for the coin thing, and he even joked that since she had all his gear, he was basically becoming her property too. Lapis told them not to worry since a traveler's gear is theirs to keep, but they need to get some sleep because a big mission starts tomorrow. She said her goodnights, and Lauren led her over to show her where she'd be crashing. Lapis was low-key fuming that she listened to Lauren instead of getting a double room, but he just told her to stop being scared and go to sleep already. Before crashing for the night, Lauren realized this was only his second mission, and he knew a job this big would definitely bring out the pros. They might not be as cracked as the Ritz group, but there are definitely iron rank adventurers in the mix, and he's really hoping this team is actually legit. The next morning at the guild, one of the girls told Loren to head to the main hall so he could finally sign up and join the team. Right in the hallway, he spots that same annoying dude from the weapon shop yesterday. As soon as he saw Roran, he started yelling his head off and called him the same idiot from yesterday. Right then, Roar realized his dream of having a chill, professional team was totally crushed. The guy mocked how Iron Rank was basically a joke these days, but his jaw dropped when he spotted Roran's bronze pendant, since this quest was strictly for Iron Ranks and up. A guild member nearby casually mentioned that Ron and Lapis were actually backed by a silver rank adventurer, and the boy's jaw totally hit the floor when he heard it. A guild member stepped in to explain that since this quest counts as a rank up from copper to iron, Rowan and Lapis are officially allowed to join the mission. Roran didn't think the guy would flex his connections, but the man just kept telling him to stay in his lane. He admitted he had no clue how the guy got so lucky, but warned him to stay sharp and not bother anyone else. Roran just coolly agreed to stay out of it and keep his distance, which totally threw the guy off since he was expecting a much bigger reaction. A guild member jumped in to stop the drama and told everyone to chill since they had to work together, but that guy was totally losing it because he got compared to Lauren. The rep stepped in and told him to stay out of the way, warning that if he messed up the mission, the guild would hit him with a massive fine. She also mentioned the guild is totally cool with Roran and Lapis joining since silver rank adventurers already proved they've got the skills. If they were just in his way, he would have crushed them. But since Frank matters so much, he really should care about what that silver rank thinks. Roran listened to the whole plan and kept his cool, and even though the guild rep warned him this was a special case and told him not to cause any trouble, Roran promised he knew exactly what he was doing. The rep looked him in the eye and admitted she thought he just had connections, but now she's totally convinced he's a legit iron rank adventurer. She was hyped about it, so she announced the briefing was starting soon, but first she had to make sure everyone was actually there. Roran looked over at Lapis, totally shocked she'd been so quiet, but she just gave a little smirk and said there's no point in arguing with people like that. And the announcer shouted out the final count, and there are only 23 people left in the game. She thanked the crew and announced their official guild mission: escort a girl named Sena Lombardia all the way to the city-state of Hansa. The announcer dropped a huge reveal that Sena is actually the daughter of Hansa's ruler, and he warned everyone they better treat her with some serious respect. The guild knew the trip to Hans would take 3 whole days, so they prepped some fast carriages and hired guards to make sure everyone stayed safe on the road. She said the guild sent messengers to warn Hans, but since they all vanished, they have to be super careful on this path. With the danger levels spiking, the guild offered 12 silver coins to everyone, but one adventurer complained that it wasn't nearly enough for a mission this deadly. The lady calmly explains that since the threat level isn't official yet, this is just the starting pay, but she promises they'll get a massive bonus if things get even more dangerous. Don't even stress about the money, because the more you risk your life, the bigger the payday is going to be. Roran knew the first team never came back, but since the guild wasn't giving any guarantees, they'd have to show some real proof to get that extra pay. He thought these terms were a total rip-off, but the guild rep kept talking and reminded him that this wasn't a choice. It was an official order he had to follow. She warned them they could back out, but it'd cost them big time, and if they actually pull this off, they're getting the normal reward plus some insane VIP perks from the guild. She told them they had to lock in and take this whole thing seriously. Clearly stressed out, the princess stepped forward and begged the guards to just take her home. She said she couldn't promise anything yet, but she'd definitely tell her dad everything to get the guards a massive bonus. Then she bowed low and thanked them with a heart full of hope. Lapis didn't even hesitate and straight up asked for the contract. Roran knew this mission was super risky, but since he was personally hand-picked for the job, he couldn't back out now. When morning rolled around and it was finally time to head out, Lauren was totally shocked to see they were actually using carriages. Lapis pointed out that walking would have taken way longer than 3 days, plus she's never actually done an escort mission before. She was blown away that the guild got those wagons ready in just 1 day, proving they really run the show, but she was also totally obsessed with how Lauren carried that massive sword like it weighed absolutely nothing. Warren says he's totally used to the heavy weapon, but Lapis reminds him he's lugging around a ton of other gear, so Warren agrees and asks what the plan is. Lapis explains they've got 3 carriages for the 23 adventurers, with 8 fighters in the first, Sena and 7 others in the second, and the final 8 people, including Ron. The guild guy screamed for everyone to hurry up and get on since they were already late, and Roran didn't waste a second arguing. He started wondering if he was just way too heavy for the cart to handle. The driver noticed the cart was tilting and yelled that it was way too heavy on one side to keep going. Lapis checked out the situation and realized they had no choice but to cross over, but one guy was already complaining about having to squeeze in so tight. Roran just hung his head and apologized, admitting he had zero excuses for what he did. The travelers stayed totally chill when he couldn't move, so one guy grabbed the bags while another admitted the gear was way too heavy and jumped in to help. They totally flattened that stroller, and Warren made sure to give everyone a massive thank you. One of the fighters shouted that they're all on the same side and have to look out for each other, because that's the whole point of being a team. Roran was shocked to find some actually good people in the group, but that tiny bit of relief vanished in a heartbeat. After traveling for hours, Roran noticed something was totally off and turned to Lapis to find out what was actually going on. Lapis looked at the scene and couldn't tell exactly what happened, but she knew for sure they were looking at a dead body, and suddenly this easy escort mission felt way more terrifying. Rorain couldn't stop wondering how everything went so wrong, as his mind flashed back a few hours to the exact moment the chaos started. Roping said he was sorry for all the trouble, hoping it would just end the drama right there. Suddenly, a guy sitting nearby loses his cool and starts yelling at Rohan for being a nuisance, straight up accusing him of blocking everyone's way on purpose. Roran let out a huge sigh, totally done with this guy's nonsense, but right as he opened his mouth to snap back, another adventurer cut him off and rudely told him to shut it. He made it clear the guild was done talking and ordered him to get in his carriage right now. Roran took one look at the guy swarmed by girls and knew he was just your typical popular kid with top-tier style. Lapis thanked one of the guys and called him bro, making Roran repeat the name to himself, while the guy looked totally annoyed and said he just hates people who talk too much. Roran is totally shocked that Lapis knows his name, but she explains that she memorized the whole list of quest members beforehand, even knowing that Rose is an Iron Rank pro who's been at. Bros acted like she was trying to insult him, but Lapis just played it cool and reminded him that hitting Silver Rank is a massive deal that most adventurers never even achieve. Brothers has been in the game for 20 years without a single major injury, so you know his skills and experience are on a whole different level. She finished her speech and flashed a grin, asking if he was blushing, but Bro just snapped at her to stop being so loud and sit down already. The guild rep gave the signal to move out, the driver shouted that it'd be a 3-day trek to Hansa, and after a quick good luck to each other, the party finally hit the road. As the sun started to set, Roran realized it was getting dark, and Bro warned him they needed to find a place to crash before traveling became way too dangerous. The cart suddenly jerked to a stop, but Bros didn't think it was an ambush since it didn't feel like an attack, so he figured the thing just broke down. Lauren felt the vibe get super tense up ahead and decided to go see what was going down. He walked up to the wheelwright to see what was going on, and even though the guy tried to act like he was fine at first, he finally admitted he felt super sick and like something was seriously wrong inside. Roran frantically asked if the people in the carriage were safe, and the driver told him they were totally okay. Bros walked up to ask Roran what was going on, but when Roran claimed the bailiff was just sick, Bros got suspicious and demanded the truth from the man himself. Suddenly, a voice screams for help, but also reminds them to lay out the mats before they even start camping. Lauren was still totally confused, so he asked the people in the carriage if they were okay, and when they didn't say a word, he opened the doors to see for himself. Lauren sounded totally panicked when she called Lapis to get over there right now, and as soon as Lapis showed up, she started checking everything out. She saw the victims gasping for air with their hearts racing, so she knew she had to get everyone out of that train car right away before things got way worse. Lapis says Senna is just in a super deep sleep and her health isn't getting any worse at all. Suddenly, Kraz jumped in and started grilling Rohan, accusing him of holding the whole group back and demanding answers right then and there. Roran didn't even look away as he gave a quick apology, told Crassus he had zero time to chat and to go set up the camp, then shouted for Brossus to help him while Crassius just stood there looking totally lost. The guys rush over to see why everyone's freaking out, but Crass just roughly waves them away. Bros found out if the priest could heal and looked over at Lapis, while Lauren realized things were getting super serious. Lapis checked him out and realized the guy just randomly lost all his strength and started gasping for air, even though he wasn't sick or hurt at all. This wasn't just regular tired. They were totally drained, and Lapis was super frustrated that she couldn't figure out what actually killed them. Their hearts and breathing just quit at the exact same time with no warning or injuries, so they were basically just dropping dead for no reason at all. The adventurers were totally outraged because they couldn't believe those people were actually dead, especially since they were fine this morning and were just sitting in the carriage like everyone else. Bros totally lost his cool and started yelling in shock, but Lapis stayed super chill and told him to go see if she was right for himself. Bros checked the bodies and saw the guy was totally dead. Lapis nodded to show they were both gone, and Roran realized right then that he had to be way more careful. Lapis didn't hesitate for a second and told them they had to burn the bodies immediately. Bros was completely caught off guard and didn't get why they couldn't just bury them. Like, if the group refuses to burn the bodies, she thinks their only choice is to head straight back to Kaffa right now. Rose asks why they're being so extra, but Lapis warns her that those dead bodies are probably about to wake up as zombies. Roran was totally shocked and shouted that it was impossible, since you usually need dark necromancy or a nasty curse to turn into the undead. Lapis explains that some people come back as the undead just because they can't let go of their old lives, but right now, the real problem isn't how they died, it's how we're going to get rid of the bodies. She told the doubters to go ask another priest, pointing right at a squad featuring Cross, Layla the Knight, Angie the Mage, and the water god priestess Loreu. Lapis admits she doesn't know everything Laura can do, but one look at her proves she's a legit priestess who probably has some answers. Cress kept his cool and told Lapis she's free to do whatever, but she better not mess with his crew's plans. Laura heard the situation and reminded them that priests can't just abandon souls, so she called on her water god to show the dead the way home. Lauren thought she looked like a legit priestess, and Lapis just smiled and agreed. But Bros totally ignored the small talk and asked what she'd finally figured out. Luru checked out the bodies and realized they were already cursed to become zombies, making Roran absolutely freak out as he saw how bad things were really getting. Bros looked at the group and told them things were officially a mess with no way out, so they needed to set up camp before dark and start burning the bodies. Rockran stepped up and told everyone they had to move the bodies, reminding them that these were their friends, and they owed it to them to show some final respect. One of the adventurers was totally losing it, shouting that it made zero sense because there wasn't even a fight before his friends suddenly turned into the undead. He was totally sure the carriage was the problem, especially since everyone who died was riding in the second one the guild sent. The traveler mentioned that after that carriage ride, Sina was the only one feeling good, while everyone else was totally wiped out. Things were getting way too intense, so Lapis scanned the area and told everyone this place was straight-up dangerous. A few adventurers were totally losing it, their voices shaking as they told everyone to look away because her creepy stare was pure nightmare fuel. Lapis stayed totally chill and told everyone to just do whatever they wanted, but Lauren was super unsure and had to double-check if he was actually serious. Lapis gave him a warm look and promised not to get in his way, admitting she just wanted to stay by his side and go on all his crazy adventures together. She's crossing her fingers that he'll confess to her exactly like that one day, and since Lapis never got in the way of his choices, she tells him to just keep doing. Roran heard this and finally chilled out, realizing there was no turning back now, and honestly, he didn't even want to. He flashed Senna a warm smile and asked her to join them for lunch, since food always tastes way better when you're not eating alone. Sina looked down all shy and turned him down, saying she wasn't even hungry. Roran quickly apologized to keep things chill and told her she needed to eat to stay strong for the rough day ahead, but while Senna agreed, she worriedly asked if she was just going to be a burden for them. Roan told her to chill out since his friend was totally cool with it, so Sina finally relaxed, thanked him, and scooted a bit closer to hang out. Right then, Crazies jumps in with a snarky comment, asking if Roran just sucked up to that silver-rank adventurer to get on his good side. He thinks this is just classic brown-nosing for extra loot, and he mocked Roran because his real plan is super obvious to everyone. Roran cursed under his breath, realizing he was stuck listening to Krasus yell at him again, and no matter how much he tried to talk his way out of it, nothing worked. He was getting so fed up he wanted to hurl something heavy just to shut the guy up, because he didn't care what was said about him. But there was no way he'd let Senna hear a single word of that trash. Praxis kept yapping about how Roran should stay away, but Roran just cut him off, gently closed Senny's eyes, and walked away to grab some firewood to distract everyone. Lapis was totally fed up and shut Cross up by hurling a log right at him, and Rowan watched the whole thing as it smacked him straight in the head. Layla was totally confused and started snapping at them, but Roran just kept spinning that blue gem with a smirk, telling her he wanted to take a good look at her next. Lapis gave a super confident yes and told everyone to chill out because she totally had things under control. She got super serious and told Lauren to stop wasting time and bring Miss Sen back right now. Bros told the whole squad that they all voted to skip going back to Kaffa and keep pushing forward to Hansa together. The adventurers started whispering, but one guy stayed totally chill, saying he knew the risks from day one and was just getting what he signed up for, especially since dead people don't get paid. He's totally down to finish the mission, but he made it crystal clear that he's not working with a girl named Sena. Brow grunted in annoyance, admitting this was actually a big problem. Roran watched him and totally got why he was frustrated, even if he wasn't a fan of the vibe. Then, she said last night was super chill, and since she and Roran stayed right by Sinus's tent to keep her company, they were together the whole time, with Lapis even confirming that Roran seemed totally fine and healthy. Roran says he's feeling 100%, so Bros asks if they're ready to head out in the carriage, but Roran just tells her they've been together all night, and he'd already know if she was trouble. Bros thanked them for the decision, saying it's a massive help for the whole squad since they definitely couldn't leave the client hanging. He asked if there was enough room for everyone else, but honestly, nobody was going to step foot in a dark carriage after what just happened. He told them to report any trouble right away, warning that if they fail, everyone else is in deep trouble too, just as Lapis walked up to greet Senna. Senna gave them a super warm look and called them her brother and sister. Then Roran stepped up and suggested they all head out as a team. He even checked in on the driver to see if he was okay, and the guy gave a super awkward nod saying he was fine. Rowan saw the bailiff was still looking pretty rough. Even though it was only day 2, things were already going totally wrong. Most of the adventurers looked completely miserable and ready to quit. Bros ordered everyone to get in position and told Rorn and Lapis they better keep their eyes peeled and stay sharp from here on out. Sina sounded super worried as she asked if everything was actually going to be okay. Lapis tells her they're totally safe because they've got a beast of a mercenary on their side, making Roran ask in shock if she's actually talking about him. Lapis just grinned and told him it was obviously about him, since he's the only guy in the squad with the nickname the Wind Cutter. Roran's totally confused and tells her to stop lying to herself since he's not that guy, explaining that people mix them up all the time even though he doesn't even have a nickname, so Lapis asks if he actually knows the real Wind Cutter. Roran admitted he didn't actually know the guy because anyone who met him on the battlefield ended up dead, so he always made sure to stay far away. Lapis smirked and asked if people always call him slow, and when Roran honestly said yes, she just nodded and agreed that he totally is. Hours crawled by, and Lapis was starting to get super bored because literally nothing cool was happening. The driver promised they'd find a spot to rest soon, and as Lauren stared at the road, she realized the time had just totally flown by. Out of nowhere, the driver spots someone standing in the middle of the road and just assumes they're regular travelers. Rowan headed over to investigate while Bros explained the situation, but they found a crowd blocking the road that looked and acted way too creepy to be normal. Roran took a closer look and saw they looked like regular villagers, but he got a bad feeling because there weren't supposed to be any towns in this area at all. One traveler got totally fed up with the wait and started screaming at everyone to move because they were blocking the whole path. Lauren saw what was going down and got totally freaked out, warning the group that these people were definitely bad news and they needed to stay on high alert. Then everything went totally wrong when one of the people on the road suddenly lunged out and bit the traveler. Chaos suddenly erupted on the road and the travelers started freaking out, with one guy screaming for the attacker to let go of his friend, while everyone wondered how this totally normal-looking person was holding on with such insane strength. Rose jumped in to help her husband break free, but he was still struggling hard and totally freaked out, wondering if these creepy people were even alive. Right then, Luru, the water god's servant, spoke up and told everyone that the people standing there were already dead. Rose was totally stunned because the sun was blazing and this shouldn't even be happening, so he immediately barked at everyone to get into their battle stances. Cress was feeling super confident and bragged that those zombies weren't even on his level. Layla yelled for him to slow down, while a super nervous Angie reminded him she was running low on magic and asked if he was sure he could handle this alone. Bros gave him the nod to leave, but he warned Lore that Crass still needed some serious medical help. Crass locked in and decided he had to slice that limb off immediately, reminding himself that even though they looked like normal people, these things were monsters now, so he struck with ice-cold focus and finished them off with a quick one-liner. Layla noticed these enemies were acting super weird, and Laura agreed, saying they weren't just basic zombies but actually revenants. Lapis gripped the sword and told Roran to get in the fight since she brought his blade, but he just looked around and said they had everything under control for now. Lapis struggled to even budge the sword and complained it was way too heavy, admitting only Roran could handle it. But he just told her not to worry since he didn't even need to join the fight yet. He could tell Cross was the type of guy who'd just be slowed down by help, which is the dead giveaway of a real iron-ranked adventurer. He switches the subject to revenants, and Lapis explains that these guys are way deadlier than normal zombies. Their name literally means returned, and they pop up because of strong regrets, a powerful undead boss, or just straight-up magic. These monsters are way deadlier than your average zombie, but they aren't actually stronger than a regular person. As their bodies rot, they just keep getting weaker. But if a high-level she warns that revenants are way deadlier than zombies, and if they swarm together, they can totally crush even iron-ranked adventurers. Lauren was totally stunned, realizing that if this was true, it made zero sense for a dozen monsters to just show up in the middle of the road when there weren't any graveyards or battle. He figured some super-strong undead were hiding nearby, and since they're just as messy as humans, the only ones he could picture were vampires. The revenants weren't even the real threat, and Bros was like, "Wait, what do you mean?" Lauren tells everyone he saw a monster bite the adventurer, but Rose says his armor kept the wound shallow, even though tooth shards are still stuck in his hand, and one enemy is still lurking nearby. Cross locked eyes with him and lunged forward like it was nothing. The brothers stared in total shock, asking what the heck just happened. The press finished the fight and just coolly told everyone it was finally over. Angie demanded to know what he meant, totally losing her cool, while Layla rolled her eyes and said Kraz was just trying to flex again. Angie thought to herself that he was a total... Praz didn't care about their complaining and said he did nothing wrong, but Lura tried to stop him, warning him that someone could be watching and showing off his powers like that was just asking for trouble. Angie calls him a total idiot again and reminds him he won without any help, while Cress wants to snap back but just stays quiet. Braz was totally lost and wondered why Cressice just snapped and vanished like a bolt of lightning. And while he definitely noticed it, Roar admitted he saw the whole thing too. He knew that if he hadn't seen this move before, he'd be totally cooked, especially since Cross was moving so fast that his strike could literally slice a Risen clean in half. Roran was still trying to figure out that power, so Lapis looked over at Browse, and when he asked if she recognized it, she nodded and said that since she serves the god of knowledge, it's definitely some kind of enhancement skill. The guys asked if it was magic, but Lapis explained that while support magic is just a temporary buff, enhancement is a natural power that makes the user and everything they touch way stronger. Bros agreed it sounded way too easy, and Lapis mentioned this rare gift usually turns people into legendary heroes, while Roar sat there wondering what the actual difference between a brave one and a hero really is. Lapis figured Cress was probably part of the Adventurers Guild, and that the government was already keeping a close eye on him. Roar thought the gift was perfect for a stuck-up show-off, and told him he didn't care since they'd never have to see each other again after today. Lapis was totally shocked and asked what he was doing, but Roran just kept his cool and said they weren't doing anything wild yet. They just had to clean up the bodies because leaving them. Panic was spreading like crazy, and one guy finally yelled that they needed to bail and head back to Kaffa because this mission was cursed. People were dying out of nowhere and then coming back to life to attack them in the middle of the day. This mission was getting way too creepy, and he realized that's probably why the other guild members vanished. So he told everyone not to run away, but to head back to the guild and regroup since they all promised to finish the job. One adventurer argued that the plan was made before the returnees even showed up, and now that things have changed, the actual danger is way scarier than any penalty for quitting. He sounded totally crushed as he talked about all the friends they'd lost, wondering if anyone would even pay for their sacrifice. But Bros told everyone to chill out and reminded them that they all knew exactly how dangerous this was when they signed up. He tells them they're way closer to Hansa than to Kaffa now, so it's smarter to just keep going, promising they'll get their reward the second they arrive. And if One of the guys refused to back down, shouting that he didn't join the group to leave empty-handed or get used as bait by the rebels. He admitted this mission was the scariest thing he'd ever done, but now he's getting a massive reward for everyone including his fallen friends, though someone snapped back that acting tough doesn't. He told them his left hand was totally fine and he was staying in the game, while another guy refused to quit too, saying it wasn't about the money anymore. He just couldn't let his friends' deaths be for nothing. Bros wraps up the plan, and since nobody's complaining, they're ready to move out. But Roran is totally overthinking things and shares his worries because he's really. All they found were basic wallets and cheap jewelry, making the brothers realize these monsters were actually just normal villagers before they turned into the undead. Roran agrees, but he warns them that since there aren't any towns nearby, they have no clue where these monsters came from and need to be extra careful. One of the adventurers walked up to Cryasus and admitted he totally misjudged him, because seeing him delete those undead so fast made the whole group feel like they were finally safe. Roran just rolled his eyes, thinking he was staring at a total textbook idiot. Bruce asked if anyone had a problem, and when nobody spoke up, he told them to keep moving since they were only 1 day away from Kanzak and had to stay sharp. Roran just smirked, thinking it was way too late for these secrets to matter anymore. Lapis saw how hard he was trying and thanked him for all his help. Roran apologized to the driver. Rowan realized that if he knew how insane this was going to be, he probably would have just turned around and headed back to Kaffa. Out of nowhere, one of the travelers screams in total shock, unable to believe what just went down. He screamed that he wasn't going to be monster food, but his voice cracked as the freezing cold started tearing him to shreds. Night 2 at the camp officially started, and Roran realized the problem wasn't just about being careful. It was that they were straight up outnumbered by way too many enemies. The camp got jumped by revenants again, and Crassus was right in the middle of the chaos, shouting that there were way too many for him to take down by himself. Roran looked over at Lapis to see if these guys were rebels, but after scanning the field, Lapis realized most of them were actually zombies. Roran saw what was happening and told the squad to stay back as he stepped forward, and while a terrified Sina shouted his name, Lapis quickly calmed her down and promised he'd be totally fine. Roran lifted his massive blade, thinking it was crazy he had to slice through gross, rotting flesh. He gripped his sword tight and started tearing through the zombies with insane power, carving a path right through the darkness of the second night. As the sword started feeling like a part of his own body, Lauren looked at it in total awe, realizing this beast was built just for him. Rose was totally stunned by how easily Lauren swung that massive metal monster, but Lauren just shrugged it off and asked if Rose was actually doing okay. Rose sucked it up and said he was okay, but he immediately started stressing about what to do next, since those dead guys just spawned out of nowhere and left everyone totally confused. Lapis figured they were being hunted just for being alive, and Roran read her mind, saying the dead were swarming them like moths to a flame. He told Bros he wasn't going to force him, but they had to pick. Keep going or turn back. Bros totally felt the pressure and mumbled that he wasn't a leader. Bros finally found his nerve and told the crew they had to push on to Hansa because they'd come too far to turn back now, and Roar agreed since Hansa was way closer than Kaffa anyway. Bros couldn't believe a whole city would actually go down, so Roran asked Lapis for her take, and she basically said she was cool with it. Rev wrapped up the plan and asked if they had a cart for the trip, so Lapis showed him the one they saved, but there was a huge catch. It only had one spot left. Roaring shouts that zombies are behind the chaos, but Lapis explains that these undead monsters actually ignore horses because they only hunt things that look like humans. Bros felt totally defeated as he explained that the drivers from the first and third carriages snatched the horses and vanished. And even though he tried to stop them, Roran knew there was absolutely... He said he'd handle the zombies nearby himself, told the guys to hitch the horses to the wagon, had Lapis grab Sana so they could move out, and then asked if the second driver was even still alive. Santa looked totally stressed and told them she'd just spotted him near the woods, so they headed over and she pointed right at him. Lapis looked closer and realized the driver was already turning into a zombie, making Roran grit his teeth in regret because he noticed the guy was sick, but ignored it, and now he was crushed that. Bros says the carriage is good to go, but there's a huge problem. Nobody knows how to drive the thing, and he's never even tried. Lapis steps up with a smirk and says it's time for the priestess of the god of knowledge to handle things, and Bros is super impressed, admitting she's got some serious skills if she can drive a cart too. Lapis flashed a smile and checked if Sanaa was doing okay, and after a quick nod back, she told Roran to hurry it up since everyone was ready to roll. Rockran shouted for the survivors to group up, telling them they were going to fight their way to Kanja since it looked like they were the only ones left alive. Cross flashed a mocking grin and said he never expected Roran to be the one who survived, calling him a little brat like he just couldn't wrap his head around it. Roran smirked when he heard Cress accidentally use his own catchphrase, thinking back to when he called for the survivors to meet up and realizing how crazy it was that Cress was the one who actually showed up. Crass didn't waste a second and asked what the plan for Hansa was, but Roran just coolly admitted he didn't have one and told Crass to suggest something else if he wasn't happy about it. Layla jumped in to stop the drama and told everyone to quit fighting, while Laura backed her up, saying they had to team up or they'd totally burn out both physically and mentally. Lauren wasn't about to wait around, so he told everyone to move fast since they were taking the very last cart to Hansa. Right then, everything went totally sideways. He felt the danger coming and yelled for everyone to hit the deck. Cress spun around and stared straight into the nightmare. That's when his eyes landed right on Angie. Lauren was totally stunned when this massive, terrifying monster appeared right in front of them, and he immediately asked what that crazy thing even was. Lapis quickly realized they were up against a bone dragon and warned that it's not just zombies running wild anymore, but all sorts of creepy monsters. Watching the chaos unfold, Angie felt like a total failure for being so sloppy, and even though she was physically fine, she knew she couldn't let anyone else suffer for her mistake. She knew if they didn't move fast, the zombies would swarm the area again, and her only mission was making sure Crass got out of there alive. Angie was totally desperate and screamed for Layla and Laura to grab Cross and get back, but Cross was absolutely fuming because he had no clue why she was calling the shots. Bros was yelling for everyone to jump in the cart so they could bail, but Cross refused to leave his girl behind, swearing he'd never abandon Angie and was going right after her. Layla realized this was totally insane and immediately spoke up, saying there was no way they could beat this monster. They were way too weak to win right now, and Laura even begged Crossy to. Roran just watched them talk while Lapis let out a huge sigh, mocking the whole vibe by saying it felt like a cheesy harem anime where the power of friendship solves everything before Sar. Roran remembered that he couldn't stand crazies at first, and since he didn't feel bad for him at all, he almost just ditched him. He knew the pain of losing people way too well to let it happen again, and when Lapis saw that, she just smiled and told him that was the exact reason she could never hate him. Rowan totally felt her pain because he knew exactly what it was like to lose someone, and looking at the situation, he realized beating that bone dragon was basically impossible. They were just regular mercenaries, not... Lapis explains that bone dragons don't actually eat meat because they feed on pure misery and sadness, which is why this monster is keeping the girl alive to suffer. He slowly sank his teeth into her, soaking up every bit of her terror and pain. She yelled that they were totally out of time. She was going to use her magic to distract the monster on the P. Roran was totally shocked because he thought Lapis only knew healing, but she hyped up her brand new skill like it was fresh out of the oven, and Roran just nodded along. Lapis locked in and started chanting her spell with total confidence, yelling, "In the name of my master, let the holy light shine." Prass watched the energy swirl in total awe while Laura realized this spell only targets evil monsters and the undead. Lapis officially dubbed her new power-purifying magic, and right then, Roran stepped up, charged his massive sword with light, and they both lunged straight into the fight. Roran gripped his sword and focused everything on crushing the monster's heart, while Lapis let out a massive scream and fired off a deadly lure to end the fight once and for all. Roran whipped around and told him to keep the speed up, while screaming for Lapis to get back in the carriage right now. Lapis gave a quick nod, grabbed the injured guy, and followed him right away. Ron kept a close eye on the dragon and realized its crushed legs had already healed up, which totally freaked him out because he knew the chase was back on. He let out a roar and leaned down to call the monster a disgusting freak, but at least he knew a pile of bones like that probably couldn't fly. He started overthinking it, wondering if a dragon made of just bones could actually fly since normal ones use magic to stay in the air. Lapis kept her eyes glued to the road, realizing the dragon was way too basic to use magic, so it probably didn't have any special powers at all. She says it doesn't even matter because the carriage is already moving at a snail's pace, and as the monster creeps closer, Cress actually asks to slow down even more to help Enji out. Rose snaps and calls him a total idiot, but he warns her that if they slow down for even a second, the dragon will catch them and kill everyone, leaving them as nothing but heroes who are... Roran ignored the argument and asked if there was a high sanctuary nearby, while Laura told everyone that if they still had magic, they had to keep supporting NG until they were totally out of juice. Brose looked Roran dead in the eye, wondering if he realized fighting this guy was a suicide mission, and made it clear they'd get wrecked without the Supreme Acolyte's power since he totally doubted Roran's actual strength. Roran knew for a fact they were cooked from the very start, and he wasn't even sweating it because he knew nothing they did could change the final result. Cross was totally panicking, reminding everyone that safety was in the opposite direction, but Roran didn't hesitate for a second, shouting that even if they all died, nobody was allowed to leave the path until they reached the very end. Roran gritted his teeth as the storm clouds finally cleared, and as the moonlight hit the road, he looked up to see that terrifying skeletal dragon was still right on their tails. Roran turned to the group and warned them not to slow down for anything, while Lapis just nodded to show she was locked in. Roran froze when he saw her dodge a tree with insane skill, realizing it wasn't luck and remembering she used to have prosthetic eyes. He turned to her, totally shocked she could see, but Lapis just gave a confident smile and said her vision was actually sharper and clearer than ever before. Rory realized things were looking super sketchy and couldn't believe everyone else was missing such an obvious threat. So he told them they had to warn everyone since that skeletal dragon could see perfectly in the dark. He told them that no matter what happens, they have to trust their gut, because in a crazy situation like this, your instincts are the only thing that'll show you the right move. Lapis looked around the carriage and dropped a totally brutal suggestion, coldly saying they should just toss that annoying red-haired kid out, and Warren knew right away she was talking about Cress. Lapis smirked and said it had to be him since he's the only clueless red-headed man-child around, making Cross freeze in total shock as he tried to figure out what was really going on with Angie. Luru's totally freaking out because her healing magic is gone, and as she fails to save Enji, Cress rushes to her side and begs her not to die. Roran knew freaking out would only make things worse, so he told everyone to keep their heads in the game and stay tough. Crass saw him walking over and asked what his next move was. Ravrin didn't care about their complaining at all, calmly telling them he didn't owe anyone an explanation before barking at Crass's guys to get moving. Cross was totally caught off guard and tried to ask what was going on, but Lapis didn't even let him finish before shoving him full force straight toward the horse. Cross is freaking out mid-air, realizing he's about to get flattened by the horse or the cartwheels, and the second he hits the ground, he starts screaming at his friends because he has no clue what they're even doing. Lapis didn't waste a second, telling him to use his enhancement power on the horse to speed up the cart, because if they don't move fast, that dragon is going to catch. Cress was still losing it over the idea of hurting someone, but Lapis yelled that they had to stop playing hero right now, or that Bone Dragon was going to turn them all into minced meat. Cress looked at everyone risking their lives for him and realized he couldn't let them die, so he fired up his ability even if it seemed totally hopeless. The cart suddenly blasted forward, giving Roran a huge jolt as he realized just how fast they were actually going. Lapis stared ahead and shouted for them to floor it since they couldn't stop until dawn. But Roran was left wondering what would actually be different once the sun came up. Lapis explains that since the Bone Dragon is undead, it'll get super weak once the sun comes up, giving them the perfect chance to ditch it and escape. Layla looked at Crass for a sign. Bros kept being stubborn about the Supreme Sanctuary, and a shaking Senna whispered brother to Loren. Roran gave them a dead serious look and said that even though things are bad, they finally have a real shot at making it out alive, because dying is definitely not the plan. Rockran jolted awake gasping for air and saw the sun was already up, realizing they'd barely escaped those guys by the skin of their teeth, and even though they took some hits, Loreu saw he was finally awake and joked that the dragon must have 9 lives, while Loreen mentioned that Senna was just sleeping, and seeing her breathing normally finally let him relax. He wondered how the others were holding up, but he was mostly curious about what was going on with Bros. Layla was standing right there and said she didn't have any answers since they just escaped. But with him getting worse every hour, Rokran asked if they'd even tried to treat him yet. Lila explained that Lura totally exhausted herself trying to heal the boys with no luck, so she's resting now, but Angie is still barely hanging on. Even after a second round of healing, absolutely nothing changed. Her injuries were just too many and way too deep. Layla straight up admitted she couldn't even tell if Angie was still alive. Roaring realized they still had no clue how two of his teammates got wiped out so fast, and he figured their luck was just straight-up trash. Lapis skipped over to him with a big smile, seeing he was finally awake, and told him the morning was incredible, just to troll him after all the chaos they just went through. Roran checked the cart and saw the horse was doing just fine, so he scanned the road to find his way and asked how much longer until they finally reached Hansa. Lapis wasn't totally sure, but she figured the road to the city should be a straight shot if they weren't lost, and Roran felt pretty good about it, saying they'd be fine as long as the path stayed the same. Lapis admitted this trip was way more than a normal walk and hoped things stayed chill, while Rora was just glad she was safe and reminded her he brought all the fabrics she asked for. Lapis gave him a sly look and teased that some guys actually like it when cute girls smack them, but Roran just stood firm and said nope, that's not his thing. Lapis breathed a massive sigh of relief because things would have been super awkward otherwise. Then she called him by name and asked if he could keep the horse moving straight. Roran asked her to make some room up front because he was totally dead from staying up all night. So Lapis scooted over, handed him the reins, and showed him the best spot to sit. Roar noticed the seats were super tight, so he told Lapis she'd have way more room to relax if she just climbed up onto the roof of the carriage. Lapis turned him down, saying she was totally fine where she was, and Warren just smiled at her, knowing she wasn't being completely honest but deciding to let it go. Roran knew they got out of the danger zone fast, but he still felt totally uneasy, like they were just waiting for the bad stuff to catch up to them. Suddenly, he caught something moving nearby as the sun shifted, and he was totally shocked to see she was finally awake, listening as she weakly called out to him, calling him her big brother. Things were getting seriously creepy inside the carriage. Everyone started feeling totally sick, and the air got so heavy that Lauren finally snapped, yelling out to figure out what was going wrong because even though Senna was literally shaking as she asked what to do next. But Rohan just snapped that it didn't matter because even their healing magic was totally useless here. They had to keep pushing forward and pray they'd hit the city soon, and while Lapis was totally sure Kanza was right around the corner, Roran was super skeptical and wondered. Lapis remembered exploring these fields back when her dad visited for work, and she realized the view in front of them was exactly how it looked before the city even existed. Rowan let out a huge sigh of relief since this was the best news he'd heard in forever. But even though he thought they finally had a chance to survive, Lapis told him not to get his hopes up just yet. She got a total bad vibe from the heavy air and warned the crew that something messed up happened, so they better be ready to throw down. Roar froze as he looked ahead, realizing the city looked totally wrong, and he bitterly spat out that this was nothing like what they expected. Lapis was just as freaked out, and while she had no clue what was going on, she knew things were definitely messed up. The massive city gates were just standing wide open. She figured if the gates were shut, the whole army might just be out fighting the frost at Dragonshire, but seeing them wide open like this made her feel way more uneasy. Roran watched the chaos and hyped up because he had no clue what to do next, but Lapis stayed chill and realized that even if an invasion of colds was coming, a totally empty city was still a massive prize. She was hoping they could grab some supplies and finally get some rest, but she made it clear they weren't about to ditch the people in wheelchairs who couldn't walk. Roran looked Senny in the eyes with total confidence, seeing that she was way too tough to ever back down, and promised he'd keep them alive and win this fight no matter what. They stepped into the city, but it was way too quiet and totally empty. Lapis noticed right away that the streets were completely deserted. There wasn't a soul in sight, and weird. He said there wasn't a single scratch or sign of a struggle anywhere, and it definitely didn't look like the dead had attacked, but Roran spotted something super weird. Even though the city was totally empty, it looked like someone was still keeping it perfectly clean. He admitted he was getting super nervous, but then he tried to play it cool by saying that two people alone in a ghost town actually looked pretty romantic. Roran wasn't hyped at all and gave a dry response, so Lapis realized she messed up, flashed a smile, and said she was just playing around. Roan points right at the guy across from him, demanding to know what's going on, while Lapis suggests they should lower Cross but quickly adds she's definitely not touching him. Roar was totally down with being careful and said he'd try his best to stay out of sight. Lapis felt terrible for the horse in trouble, but Ron reminded her they had 4 people of their own barely hanging on and needed to find a hospital first. Lapis is totally down for the plan and asks Sina where the hospital is, so Sina takes a quick second before confidently pointing the way. Lapis told the whole squad to head right, but Roran realized he could only drive straight and handed the wheel back, so Lapis thanked him for the quick help. When they get to the building, Roran is super skeptical because it looks way too small for a hospital, but Sina is just totally confused and doesn't see the problem. Lapis explains this is just a tiny clinic, not a big hospital, and she's actually shocked the ruler's daughter even knows it exists, guessing Sina's dad probably brought her here to see his secret personal doctor. Santa promised this doctor is a total pro and said her dad used to bring her here all the time. Lauren thought it was super sketchy that the mayor hired a private doctor for his daughter instead of just using a normal clinic. Lapis figured staying put was actually safer since she wasn't about to go anywhere public without knowing what was happening in the city. And seeing how exhausted she looked, Lauren really wanted to know what was making her so paranoid. Lapis says she isn't sure yet, so she tells Roran to pull the victims out of the carriage and asks their friend to help out. Cross struggled to lift his head and told them he needed a breather since he basically carried the whole team away from that dragon. Lapis made sure he knew that Mr. Roran was the one who actually saved Angie from that dragon. The reporters finally admitted Loren was the real deal, but you could tell they hated every second of thanking him. Rockran reminded them the rescue wasn't over yet, telling everyone to stop talking and start moving the victims to the clinic, and Cross finally caught his breath, agreeing it was time to get back to work. Roran remembered how his priestess would go totally wild whipping those crosses at night, and he didn't even look like he minded. The reporters were totally lost and had no clue what he was talking about. Roran teased that maybe Crassus was actually having a good time. Crassus shut that down fast, claiming Lapis jumped in, saying Kraz would have snapped out of it without that huge hit, but Roran just smirked and said he didn't care how it happened because the whole mess was just hilarious. Roran shouted that they were all done, and when Lapis asked if everyone got lowered down safely, Roran confirmed the job was finished and even left some supplies in the carts for them. They didn't find a ton of stuff, but they did score some food, and Lapis was super relieved to find that this small clinic was actually loaded with all the medicine they needed. The reporters cornered Lapis about being a priestess and asked if she knew medicine, so she told them she's got the skills and is totally sure Laura is an expert too. He explained that Laura is the legal expert and Angie is their medic, admitting he's totally stuck without Angie's help right now and giving Lapis a huge shout-out for the assist. Lapis looked around and realized she could actually save these people, so she stepped up to the first patient and got to work. Rowan told her to move it because losing someone right at the finish line would be a total disaster, while Lapis kicked all the guys out so she could finally start the treatment. They were totally wasting time they could have used to help, and Cress was fuming, yelling that she only wanted him gone because the victims were his friends. Lapis just chilled and said she was about to start something that meant 3 girls had to get undressed, then teased that Crassice probably wouldn't want to see it, and asked if he really wanted to check out the girls naked. Cress turned bright red and tried to make excuses, but Lapis teased him by saying she'd have to strip Mr. Bross next, sarcastically joking that Cress must. Cross was totally caught off guard and tried to say he never agreed to that, but Lapis just shushed him so they could stay focused on getting ready. Roaring backed off to speak up, but Lapis just thanked him and told Sina they should go scout the area themselves since she didn't trust a guy as crude as Crass to handle it. She warned him that looking after Sina was a total mistake, and she'd be way safer with Roran, while Roran just asked Lapis if she actually wanted the girl to stay at the house. Lapis calmly pointed out that everyone has to strip down for treatment, and seeing Mr. Bross totally naked would probably scar Sina for life. Roran was totally shocked he had to strip naked, but Lapis promised it was safe as long as the guys just stuck to the perimeter. She pointed out that Senna's a local who knows the area perfectly. Lauren realized she was totally right, and Lapis asked if he was down to help. Roran promised to bail the second things got too sketchy. Lapis wished them luck and said she'd be waiting, but then Senna quietly dropped the news that she was going with him. Lapis was left all by herself and felt super stressed about how to start, but Cress, even though he's a total klutz, cheered her on and told her to just go for it. Lauren headed for the exit and told Santa it was time to move, so Santa agreed, called him brother, and followed right behind. Rowan looked down the old market street and saw the veggies were all dried up but not rotten yet, which meant whatever went down had to have happened super recently. The shops were totally untouched, and there wasn't a single sign of a struggle. But with half-eaten food still on the tables, it looked like everyone just vanished into thin air. She's worried sick about where everyone went, but Roran points out that if they really ran away, they wouldn't have left all their food and valuables behind. It's like they just vanished into thin air. Roran asks Senna if she knows how many people live there, but she's totally clueless, so he looks at the massive scale of the city and guesses there's probably between... It felt like those people just vanished into thin air like smoke. So he decided that as soon as he got back to Kaifa, he'd tell the Adventurers Guild everything, even though he knew they'd probably think he was crazy. He says people don't just vanish into thin air because there's always got to be some blood, a body, or some kind of clue left behind. Sina softly called him brother, making Roran realize he was acting way too stressed. And even though he apologized, she admitted she was also freaking out since they hadn't heard anything about her. Rovan figured that if his parents and the rest of the town were still alive, they'd definitely be hiding out in the castle or the main mansion right in the middle of the city. He saw the Hanse was walled off, but these defenses weren't built for a real street fight, so the main road to the mansion was basically a clear shot. He'd love to hit up that castle soon, but he's starting to panic because only 3 of his 7 allies can actually fight, and that's a recipe for disaster. He figured it was safer to wait for the other 4 to heal up before going all out, but he was seriously worried they were running out of time. Cinna noticed Roran looking all tense and asked what was up, so he told her he felt eyes on them and that someone, or maybe even a monster, was definitely lurking nearby. Sina pointed to the side and shouted that she saw something moving. Lauren stops her in her tracks and shouts that he's an adventurer on an official mission for the Hanseatic League, explaining he's just trying to figure out this mess before turning to the stranger and demanding to know who she is and what exactly happened to the city. The girl looked totally exhausted and terrified while begging for help, so Lauren asked if she lived nearby. She confirms she's a local, so he gets serious and asks where everyone went and why she's all alone, and she tells him that a few days ago, everyone just started acting totally bizarre. She was totally freaked out and hid in the basement until she ran out of food and had to come out. So Roran asked if she had any family left, but she told him her parents. The girl admitted she had no clue, but then she looked at Sign in total shock and asked if she was the master's daughter, and Roran didn't even deny it, admitting that Senna could actually be his kid. She's super hyped because the place they're heading to is actually safe, with soldiers on guard and a massive fence protecting everyone. Roran realized his gut feeling was totally right and this was the only way, so he decided to fill Lapis in before asking the girl what her next move was. The girl nervously begged to tag along because she'd never make it to the master's house alone, promising that as a Kanza local, she'd do whatever it takes to serve and look after the head of the family. She introduced herself as Sutel and honestly asked if she could join their squad. He kept it respectful and gave them a polite thank you. Cress watched the whole thing go down and casually pointed out they found a survivor before inviting her inside, while Roran noticed he was staying totally alert just like he was told, proving he was actually a super reliable guy. Ruin used to think Crassus was just a total jerk, but now he's realizing the guy is actually pretty cool and probably only acted that way because of the toxic environment he was stuck in. Lapis greeted Roran the moment he got back, and when he asked about the treatment, she said it was finally finished, even though she still couldn't go inside, right before she spotted her. Rokran explained that Sutel was the only survivor left in the whole city, so they needed to start moving to the house right now while they still had daylight. Lapis thought the plan was solid and said 3 of the mystery patients are finally getting better, but she warned that Angie's case is way more of a mess. Angie was in a really bad spot with internal bleeding and crushed organs, and Lapis warned that moving her right now was totally out of the question. Roran asked how long the recovery would take, and Lapa told him she needed to rest for the day. But once Laura wakes up tomorrow to use her healing magic, they should finally be able to. Roran realized that rushing would get Engie killed, so he left Cross to guard her while the rest of the crew headed to the residence. Lapis called Lauren straight up heartless for wanting to ditch Ange, but Lauren pointed out how funny it was that a former priest like her was judging him. Lapis took a second before asking what the plan was, and Roran figured they should just stay the night and wait until everyone was healed up enough to travel safely. Lapis was totally down and started prepping for the night to keep everyone safe and cozy, while Sutel jumped in right away to help her get everything organized. Lapis turned down the help and made Sen and Sutella stay in totally different rooms until morning. Sutel's super worried and asks why she can't even help out, but Lapis stays totally calm and tells her that if she wants to be part of the crew, she has to follow every single order without question. She warned her that if she talks back or breaks the rules, Sutella is getting kicked out of the group for good. Sutel was totally caught off guard by the warning but didn't push back, while a super nervous Santa called out to him, just hoping for some answers. Lauren felt the vibe getting super intense and tried to jump in before things got ugly. Lapis realized she was being way too harsh and apologized immediately, explaining that her cold attitude was just a leftover habit from her brutal priestess training. She wouldn't take no for an answer and told Sutel to just follow the plan, since it was super easy and she could definitely pull it off. I realized arguing was a total waste of time, so I just shut up and went along with it. Lapis took the lead and brought Sutel back to her room, then she immediately called Sina to join them. She didn't want to leave her brother, so she shyly asked Roran if she could stay, but Lapis shut her down immediately, saying there was no way that was happening. Warren sat next to the girl and whispered that even though he was totally confused, he was 100% sure she'd be way safer staying inside than going out there. He told her a solid guy was guarding the place and promised they'd find her parents tomorrow, so Sina just nodded and agreed to the plan. Roran was seriously stressing, just hoping that everything would actually work out and that his gut feeling was right despite all the weirdness.